g'day, mate 40 here. So, if God forbid war should come, then I've let you each know what your responsibilities are. I expect each man to do his... And if this live stream channel should go down, if this long story of ours is to end at last, let it end only when each one of us lies choking in his own blood upon the ground, okay? So when you hear... Alright, that's the signal if war should come, right? So you will be prepared, alright? I expect each man to do his duty, right? Don't shirk on me, mates. Don't go soft on me. This is no time to go wobbly if war should come. So remember the signal. War should come. If war should come, I expect each man to do his duty. If war should come. If war should come. We are prepared.
No one in this country of ours wants war.
If war should come.
If war should come, you shall not call a halt until the aggressor is beaten.
If war should come.
Democracy will triumph. Pay no attention to rumors.
If war should come. Don't pay attention to rumors and listen to official sources.
The vital part to play.
That means you. If war should come. Don't listen to rumors. And check in with authorized sources and information, guys. If war should come. Let the didgeridoo call you to attention to do your duty.
You must be ready to obscure all lights in your house
If war should come.
and to extinguish all lighted street signs.
If war should come. If war should come. Heed the call of the didgeridoo and do your duty. If war should come. If war should come. If war should come. If war should come.
No one in this country of ours wants war. But if war should come, don't be alarmed.
Don't be alarmed,
Keep a
guys.
good heart. Whatever happens, Britain is a nation prepared.
If war should come. If war should come.
I have
This is a
till
channel
now
prepared.
this country is at war.
If war should come. We don't seek war, God forbid, but if war should come, if they come for our channel, then men to your stations. You know your responsibilities if war should come. And if they come for this community of ours, if this long history of our channel is to end at last, let it end only when each one of us lies choking in his own blood upon the ground. So I've been reading the terrific book, Britain at Bay, the epic story of the Second World War. So Neville Chamberlain had lost the confidence of the House of Parliament by May 7 of 1940. So he first tried to form a coalition with the Labour Party, but the Labour Party members, they resented him because they found him too sarcastic, just too personally unkind. So he'd been too cruel for too long and too often, too sarcastic, too much and too personally. So they would not form a coalition with Neville Chamberlain. So big doors swing on small hinges. So then the next candidate was Lord Halifax, who was popular, but he did not lack self-confidence. But his problem was Winston Churchill. So Winston Churchill at this point is the First Lord of the Admiralty, the most dynamic member of the War Cabinet. He knew that Churchill would remain the key figure in any Halifax administration. So he had no desire to play the part of a merely honorary prime minister in the First Lord's shadow, living in a kind of twilight just outside the things that really mattered. So Churchill must get a chance of his own first. He might well mess it up. And then if he did, the way would be cleared for Lord Halifax to make his move. So I remember when I was going to Placer High School, these 2-star football coaches were resigning after a glorious 15-year reign. And the offensive line coach was obviously Mr. Bear. He was obviously the next one in succession, but he didn't want to succeed the legends. So he allowed the school to recruit another coach from Southern California. Then when that coach didn't work out after a year, then I think Mr. Bear moved in. Lots of good stuff in Britain at Bay, the epic story of the Second World War. And Neville Chamberlain, by the way, he was not unpopular when he resigned. So he had over 50% approval ratings. Churchill was 65 years of age in May 1940. His energy was impressive, but how long, realistically, could he be expected to endure the stresses of wartime leadership? Perhaps after a decent interval, he'd give way to one of the rising new men of the cabinet, such as the 42-year-old Anthony Eden, who would be a popular choice to replace him. So Anthony Eden was just 42. He was good-looking, was from an elite background, and he was very clearly the heir apparent. Okay, here's Michael Tracey talking about where's the fraud, guys? Where's the fraud? He just did this stream.
Alrighty, hello everybody. So a recurring issue that I'm encountering in the aftermath of this election is that there are a lot of people online with whom you cannot even have a discussion about the election results because there's no baseline of shared understanding as to the legitimacy or veracity of those results. So if I make some observation about, let's say, patterns in voting behavior in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania in 2020 compared to 2016, what'll happen is I'll get inundated with allegations that the data itself or the election results themselves are not valid because of this issue of widespread fraud. So unlike many people in the media who will just summarily discount these allegations without really even bothering to engage with them, I've tried to some degree to engage with them. Now, there's so many, and the legitimacy of any one allegation is not consistent because anybody on the internet can say anything they want. But nonetheless, I think it's foolhardy to not at least strive to engage with what this discussion is because it's going to have long-term consequences on American political culture. I think everybody can pretty much agree that notwithstanding what the final outcome of the electoral colleges or the state certifications or what have you, for a quite extended period of time going forward, there's going to be a significant chunk of the electorate, especially as manifests online political discussions, who simply reject outright the legitimacy of the election results. And I think that's going to be a phenomenon which has all manner of second and third order effects just in terms of how we conceive our polity. And, Donald Trump himself is also making these claims, who obviously has a major impact. So if you have a specific allegation here that you'd like me to address, preferably it would be not just vagaries, not just feints at something that you've heard, but like a specific evidentiary claim that can be independently and impartially evaluated, then put it into the chat box here with the, I'm not going to see every random comment. but I will see the super chats. And I know that seems like a potential ploy just to for you to give me money, but that's not really the main objective here. Anyway, let me just kind of set the context a little bit further. Okay, so here's a frustration that is also recurrent with this discussion. People claim that they have rock solid evidence of fraud. The fraud is indisputable. You are deluded, or you're a member of the MSM, or you just hate Trump, so you can't see reality clearly, and that's why you're so oblivious to this incontrovertible evidence of rock solid, widespread systematic fraud. And I use the phrase widespread systematic fraud because that's what it would take to establish in order to convincingly invalidate these election results. And yet, when you drill down on so many individual claims of fraud, very often they're suffused with outright BS. And let me give you one example. Okay, so yesterday, Trump put out a tweet where he was going off a meme that had been disseminated by this state senator from South Central Pennsylvania, Doug Mastriano, who was involved in orchestrating this, quote, hearing they had 8 days ago in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania on the subject of election fraud. And Mastriano put out a tweet yesterday which contained an image. And in that image, the following question is posed. Pennsylvania reports having mailed out 1,823,148 ballots, of which 1,462,302 were returned. Yet total mail-in votes number 2,589,242. From where did the extra 2 million plus, from where did the extra 1 million plus it comes down to the votes come? Okay, wow. I mean, if that were true, that would certainly be significant. If Pennsylvania reported having mailed out over 1 million fewer ballots than were returned, we'd have a serious problem on our hands. Now, that would be a legitimate thing to deeply inquire about. Perhaps it could cast doubt on the entire legitimacy of the election in Pennsylvania. The issue is, it's not true. And it's not true to such a remarkable extent that you could fact check it within a matter of seconds. I mean, it's blatantly, demonstrably not true. And I'm not one of the people who says, oh, fact check. Every kind of subjective claim that a politician, including Trump or a Republican, can make is subject to this tedious fact-checking process, which is really just competing subjective claims most of the time, per this new genre of fact-checking commentary that so many people in the media do. But there are things that can be straightforwardly fact-checked, like a pure numerical allegation. So I looked at this. I saw this claim that Pennsylvania only reported having mailed out 1,823,148 ballots for this election. So I looked into it, and gee whiz, it turns out that you can go to an official database provided to you by the Pennsylvania state government, which gives information as to the number of ballots being sent out for the various elections. And lo and behold, that number, 1,823,148, was the exact number of ballots that were sent out for the June 2nd primary election in Pennsylvania, not the general election, the primary election. So what is going on here? This is the state senator in Pennsylvania who's at the forefront of challenging the election results in Pennsylvania, who is being amplified by Trump personally, who is now going to be involved in these maneuverings to get the Pennsylvania Republicans to object to the seating of electors and so on and so forth. And he puts out a claim which is not just false, it's like laughably false. It's not about competing subjective interpretations of any facts. It's just a outright factual falsehood. He wasn't 100. I mean, do they have people who want to put forward the most convincing case on this that is like factually sound, or are they just flooding the zone with as much BS as possible that it creates confusion and disaffection? I would say it's most likely the latter, just judging on this one claim. Now, this isn't the only claim, but this is so ridiculous as to call into question so much of what we're being told, at least if you engage with this subject online. So if you're not willing to admit, if you're in good faith putting forward a thesis of widespread election fraud having dictated the outcome of the election, and you're willing to just overlook or ignore or excuse an outright falsehood like this, then that, I think, should make people a little bit suspicious as to the premises that you're working from, because this is just absurd. And it reinforces my sense that most of what we're dealing with here is really not a legal offering or a legal case in any traditional sense. It's a theatrical performance. It's getting people amped up, enabling a lot of people on the internet, a lot of people with vested professional or social interests to raise a lot of money by claiming that they can investigate all this fraud and, I don't know, change the results in various states. Another issue that bears repeating is that when you look at the appellate court ruling yesterday in Pennsylvania, which was authored, by the way, by a Trump appointee, not that it should necessarily matter, but that's obviously going to be pointed out. The judge, Judge Bibas, who again was appointed by Trump, so you can't just do this kind of low IQ partisanship dismissal of what's in this judge's ruling, notes that the Trump campaign official suit in Pennsylvania, quote, does not allege fraud. Judge Bibas quotes.
Okay, we got a female kicker today. Vanderbilt Sarah Fuller becomes first woman. This is very, very exciting. Whoa, not such a giant kick there.
And the kick down at the 35-yard line.
Okay, she just set back women in
Happy
sports.
Thanksgiving. What a day. What a day
For decades.
in college football.
She could only kick it to the 35-yard line.
History today. The first female to ever play in a
that was a
Power
terrible
5
kick.
football game.
You should be
what
embarrassed.
What emotions are you feeling now that you've reached such a milestone?
That was pathetic.
Honestly, it's just
you only
so
got
exciting.
it to the 35-yard
and the fact that I
line.
can represent like the little girls out there who wanted to do this, or
Surely
thought
there's
about
someone
playing
who
football or
competent.
any sport, really, and it encourages them to be able to step out and do something big like this, so it's awesome.
Pathetic.
We were all patiently awaiting the entire first half, hoping we'd get to see you take the field, but you come out after halftime, you take the field for the kickoff. What was your mentality in that moment? Honestly, I was just really calm. The SEC championship was more stressful, if I'm going to be honest. But I was really excited to step out.
Okay, so Vanderbilt was 0-7 going into today's football game against Missouri. Both their kickers were quarantined. They did the publicity stunt of dressing the school's women's soccer team goalie as their place kicker. This was hyped as the first time ever a woman had played in big-time college football. This was her only action all day in the 0-41 loss, a kickoff that merely got to the 35-yard line. So if Vanderbilt held an open edition, they would have found over 100 male undergraduates who can kick off deeper than the best woman kicker on campus. Colleges are full of guys who are pretty good players in high school on football or soccer teams, but don't pursue football in college. And then this woman, the affirmative action choice, can barely get it to the 35-yard line. All right, let's celebrate some happier news here.
Hi. I put a ring on it.
That's it. That's all we wanted to say.
We're engaged.
Mazel tov. Mazel tov.
Hi.
I put a ring on it.
That's it. That's all we wanted to say.
We're engaged.
Lucky guy. Mazel tov. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay. Every mass movement has its stupid people, without a doubt. And it is easy to cherry pick, but Trumpism pioneered a special sort of weaponized stupidity that I'm glad to see leave the national spotlight. So here's Mike Cernovich saying, I'm the most read person who people will not openly admit to reading in all of human history. That's Cernovich yesterday tweeting. And then June 2nd, he tweeted, when I think about how I'm only 42, never thought I'd use only before 4 decades of my life, there is a high degree of probability that I will be remembered as one of the most significant Americans in history and perhaps people in world history. Yeah, you're the next Julius Caesar. Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Wow. What a great moment. Yeah. Okay, what do we got here? Emma Jo Morris on the New York Post. Americans' rights are not protected on the internet. There's not a single lawmaker who understands this. I think Josh Hawley understands it, Senator from Missouri, let alone one making a serious effort to fix it beyond theatrical flexing on TV. Data is an extension of the self in the digital realm. There's no conversation about that. Bureaucrats do understand this, but they have no incentive to rectify it. In fact, they have direct incentive to perpetuate the status quo. Abolish Section 230 as a distraction does nothing to address this, nor does it address anti-competitive behavior in the oligopoly in Silicon Valley. Someone is barred by law from opening and reading your mail, but they are not barred by law from reading your emails, texts, viewing your camera roll, storing that information, and selling it. This is done every second of the day. If you'd like to engage with the modern world, you must submit to those terms despite them violating your rights granted by God. I don't want to sue massive companies for censorship at my expense. I want a decentralized system where I'm in control of my privacy, responsible for my speech and my existence, and private conversations are not for sale. System in which we function today is digital slavery, should be framed as such. We are around the clock being stripped and taken advantage of by unaccountable mega corporations with zero recourse apart from, if you don't like it, don't engage in digital society. We ought to be able to bank, travel, and communicate while maintaining our rights and sovereignty. This was ratified by the Constitution in 1788.
Very good, Buffy. We've almost got it.
Yes. When are you off to America?
I'm going in the next couple of days, actually, so I thought I'd better brush up my Star-Spangled Banner.
Yes.
Well, you have to. You have to be able to play that, otherwise they won't give you a visa. Terribly sticky about that. Toscanini waited for years and years.
Mind you, you can see their point of view. If they didn't have these regulations, any old riffraff could get in.
Yeah. They've got a lot of riffraff there already, haven't they?
That's the first thing that will strike you.
The riffraff, I mean.
No, Buffy, the first thing that will strike you about the Americans is they're not English.
Well, of course they're not English, they're American.
Now, what I mean is they're not English, they're not of English stock. I mean, you only have to look at the names. Lefkowitz, Ribblewitz, Vaseline. Those aren't English names.
They used to be.
No, they never were.
I mean, they used to be very good English stock, though. Anglo-Saxons.
Puritan.
Exactly. It was the Statue of Liberty that started the rot.
How was that?
Well, you see, they put up the statue, and I mean, it's a lovely statue.
Well,
it's a beautiful statue. Then some idealistic Johnny went and inscribed on the bottom all this business about, give me your poor, your huddled masses. Well, of course, people did. The huddled masses leapt at the opportunity. They came over in droves.
Bred like rabbits, died like flies.
And spread like wildfire. The whole place was swamped.
Isn't there a very serious colour problem over there?
Yes, there is, but you won't have any difficulty.
I think there is a very real danger of seeing the colour problem simply in terms of black and white.
It is a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah. But I gather the Negroes are sweeping the country.
Yes, so they are. It's about the only job they can get. Very well, they do it too.
Don't they sweep beautiful sweepers.
And what's all this black muslin I hear they're wearing?
No, Buffy, they're not wearing it, they're joining it. It's a movement rather than a cloth. Of course, Buffy, one thing you will notice about America, and that it's a very young country, rather like Ghana in that respect.
Of course, they have inherited our two-party system, haven't they?
How does that work?
Well, let me see now. They've got the Republican Party, you'll see, which is the equivalent of our Conservative Party, and then there's the Democratic Party, which is the equivalent of our Conservative Party, you'll see. And then, of course, there are the Liberals in the shape of people like, Yes.
Are the Liberals Democrats or Republicans?
Yes. I mean, as is convenient for them.
Oh, I see, yes. Of course, you know, the Americans must be frightfully jealous of our royal family.
Right. Except there is a sense in which the Queen is the President and the Prime Minister all rolled into one.
One what?
Exactly. That's the whole dilemma of the American Constitution.
Mind you, I think he's doing an awfully good job. He's a very cultivated fellow, too.
Very cultivated.
Yes, I understand he's taking steps to federalize the avant-garde.
What an exciting concept. Of course, Buffy, one thing you will notice about the Americans, God bless them, that's they're terribly naive about sex.
In what way?
Exactly.
They're terribly naive about it. I mean, they think of sex in terms of beautiful blonde women with huge breasts and pink skins and blue eyes.
Pathetic.
Pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. How do you think of sex?
I don't, actually. At least I try not to. Otherwise I start thinking of beautiful blonde women with huge breasts and pink skin. Pathetic, yes.
Pathetic.
Of course, you have to admire the Americans, you know. They really do have something to believe in, you see. They really do believe in anti-communism. I think.
God, I wish we had a positive faith like that in England, you know.
Gives us something to hold on to. Times of stress.
Yes. Isn't there a lot of poverty over there?
There is, but luckily it's all been concentrated in the slum areas. It's beautifully done. You'd scarcely notice it.
Where are you going in America?
I'm going to New York first.
Well, of course, you must remember, New York isn't America.
What is it then?
New York is New York, but it's not America.
It's not America. If you want to see America, you ought to go to the South.
The South's charming, but it's not America.
It's not America, no.
Now, there's Washington, of course. Then that's got a certain sort of Parisian atmosphere. It's certainly not America.
It's not America. Of course, Los Angeles is fascinating, but it's not America any more than San Francisco, and that's not America.
There's the West, of course. Now, that's very exciting.
Very exciting.
It's not America.
It's not America.
And there's the North America, but that's Canada. I mean, not America.
Not America.
Where is America?
The Cape, I think.
Massachusetts.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's just a little bit of England.
That's America.
Okay, that's from Beyond the Fringe there with Dudley Moore and Peter Cook, Alan Bennett, and Jonathan Miller. Let's get back to the highbrow content for which this show is famous. Get away from the tawdry pandering to our lower impulses.
One, the only, JF Gariepy.
Let's
JF, how's
go
it
to two
Hello, it's going well. I'm glad to be here again.
intellectuals.
Very glad to have you on. JF has a new show on YouTube. It's called JFG Tonight. If you've not yet heard about it, I highly recommend that you just type in JFG Tonight on YouTube and subscribe to his channel. What are you waiting for? It is a great way to spend your weekday evenings, and it's a very high quality show, which is exactly what I'm expecting, JF. But yeah, JF, before we begin discussing what's going on in some really unfortunate sectors of the media, I guess why don't you share a bit about your show and what it brings to the table?
Well, JFG Tonight is just a rebrand of the public space. The goal was not to change radically, but the name the public space has become useless in the current context because I can't have guests anymore. The guests are too, they don't agree to follow the rules, and so it threatens our channels. So I've decided to go so.
Okay, this is important. He says, I can't have guests anymore because the guests essentially aren't high IQ or disciplined enough to follow the rules. So JF and me, to a much, much lesser extent, we were able to have an impact briefly, entirely disproportionate probably to our own qualities because we are serving a dramatically underserved niche, right? There is far more demand for quality about dissident right politics than there are people providing quality content in that arena. It's just like when I was reporting on the porn industry, I was able to get 10, 15, 20,000 viewers a day on my blog because there was so little competition for any decent reporting journalism on the porn industry that I was able to find a niche. And so too with the dissident right, JF Gariepy and myself, Mike Enoch. Like if Mike Enoch was talking about any other topic, he would get 1/20th of the listenership that he currently gets. But because you've got about 5% of the American population who are interested in dissident right material, and there's virtually no base of content providers serving it of any quality, just a very small base. So it allows people with modest talent or moderate talent to have entirely disproportionate impact. So now the playing field is getting leveled. So it used to be I'd go online and I'd never have fewer than 100 viewers, just effortlessly. And even if I went online right now and I put Mike Enoch or Richard Spencer or some dissident right personality in the headline, I could still pop it up to 100 viewers because there's enormous demand for that kind of material. But there's also a backlash to making that kind of material. So YouTube doesn't want it. Advertisers don't want it. And so when I was writing about the porn industry, I was like, that porn guy, I don't want to have anything to do with him. So the real world effects of writing or speaking on dissident materials publicly, it discourages one. So now, due to increasing regulations on YouTube, the playing field's getting leveled. You can't get that cheap level of viewership anymore by simply pandering to the underserved dissident right community. Yes, Kevin Michael Grace can get at least 100 viewers because Kevin Michael Grace is a very talented and professional bloke. All right, he's got a long history in talk radio, and he knows how to deliver to an audience, and they're not disappointed. Right? He's got a particular niche, and he tells the audience, things within that niche. So if you want to hear certain things, you can go to Kevin Michael Grace, and you can get that every single day. And JF Gariepy, he has a particular audience, and he feeds that audience what it wants to hear every single day. And so there's a market. That's the business model, all right? You tell people what they want to hear, and you tell it to them every day. You just use different news stories, different examples, different illustrations, but it's the same basic thing. You tell people what you want to hear, and then you are serving a particular audience. So if you're doing a show about the struggles of young mothers with young toddler children, then you just hit that niche every day. You can be successful. If you do a show about the Dallas Cowboys, then you just talk about the Dallas Cowboys every day. if you do a pro-Trump show, then you want to come in every day with a pro-Trump message. And JF Gariepy was able to have so much success because he was serving this underserved market. There was an enormous demand, and he never pushed his viewers outside of their own very comfortable perspectives. So JF became more and more radical to fit the market, right? The market would incentivize him to become increasingly anti-Semitic, for example. That's where the money was. That's where the viewership was. So he appealed to the 1488 crowd. He appealed to the Right Stuff crowd, the Daily Stormer crowd, and he told them what they wanted to hear day in, day out. Now, the downside to that is that the playing field's been leveled. YouTube won't allow you to get away with that anymore. And so JF can find guests. Anyone can find guests. But for years, he has been seeking guests from people with low impulse control, people who are socially unacceptable. So it will be quite a challenge to adapt himself to more socially functional people. Just like when I was writing on the porn industry, I was able to get amazing material because these people were already out where the buses don't run no more. So they didn't have the same compunctions as normal people. So they were always saying like amazing, incredible, flabbergast-worthy things that would draw in viewers because it was such a train wreck. So JF Gariepy was able to have such a successful show for years because he would bring on these train wreck of characters. Now that business model on YouTube anyway is largely dead. So JF's trying to adapt by doing a one-person show, incredibly more challenging. Now, he can find guests who will operate within YouTube's terms of service, but he doesn't get to bring in the train wreck guests that populated his show for years. So these new guests are more discerning, they're more intelligent, and they're going to be more challenging. So I don't see him having success just doing a solo show. It'll be much, much more difficult for him to have success doing a solo show. Where JF was at his best and when I was at my best in terms of viewership and income was when we were bringing in train wreck guests, when we were bringing in the blood sports. Right? That's what people want to see. They want to take, the human drama. They want to take in human drama. They want the train wreck. They want to hear, ridiculous people saying ridiculous things. And that's where the audience is. My biggest rating show was the Saturday Night Massacre with Jim Goad, Nick Fuentes, Baked Alaska, and the whole gang.
Solo and see, even if I have a smaller show, even if the guests, of course, were bringing in audience from all corners of the internet, I have to accept that it's impossible to run a show on YouTube that explores ideas in depth and that allows guests in because the guests are...
No, it's not impossible to have a show on YouTube that explores ideas in depth and has guests. You just can't do it the easy way. All right? It's easy to go out in the bars and bang 4s and 5s. All right? It's much harder to get out there and bring home an 8. All right, usually 8s are much more discerning. So effectively, for years, JF and myself, this is nothing about I'm holier than thou. Like I wrote on the porn industry for a decade, all right? I'm holier than nobody, all right? But for years, JF and to a lesser extent, I were able to go out and bring in a bunch of, 4s, a bunch of socially dysfunctional train wreck characters, and, we'd laugh. And it was kind of lowbrow. It was kind of low effort content that would bring in a lot of viewership, but maybe didn't have such socially redeeming features. Now, JF can explore some ideas and he can bring in some guests. He just can't bring in the trailer trash, low IQ, and he can't jump on the distant ideas, the ideas that are heavily stigmatized. Therefore, you can get an enormous audience if you discuss heavily stigmatized ideas. Right? Initially, you get an enormous audience, but then platforms find out that there's enormous backlash for bringing in these distant ideas, and so they crack down. So anyway, the salad days are over. The easy picking days are over. Like the shock and awe days are over, where you just bring in a bunch of morons and have them yell at each other and display how dysfunctional they are. those days are over. So do you give up? Do you just say, oh, it's not possible to explore ideas anymore on YouTube or bring in guests? That's absurd. It's perfectly possible to explore ideas. You cannot explore dissident right ideas. You can bring in guests. You can't bring in trailer trash morons. You can't bring in antisocial people. You have to be much more discerning about the kind of train wreck characters that you bring into the show. So it's more challenging, all right? It's the difference between playing tennis with the net down and playing tennis with the net up. So for about 3 years, JF Gariepy was essentially playing tennis with the net down. And for same amount of time, I too was playing tennis with the net down. Now the net's up to regulation height. And there are also borders around the court where you can hit the ball, right? Now we have to compete on the same sort of playing fields that regular people have to compete on if they want to build an audience. But it's always easier to cast it, oh, now I can't explore any ideas, and oh, now I can't bring on any guests, and oh, it's also slanted against me. There's just no chance for creativity anymore. I can't talk to people anymore because the rules, they're just so nasty and mean. Look what you mean people have done to me. I could have been a contender, but now all I can do is talk to you myself. I can't have guests, and I can't explore ideas.
Are just not educated enough for YouTube monetization policy, and YouTube also hate speech and community guidelines. So I decided to go solo, and that's what JFG Tonight is. And at the same time, if we can't engage with guests because there is so much censorship, it's not really a public space anymore. It's more a private space, and so the name was not relevant anymore as it was back in the day.
Okay, so there's a question in the chat: is Greg Johnson low IQ? No, obviously Greg Johnson's not low IQ, and many of the people that JF brought in on his show were high IQ, but they were social dissidents, right? And there were people who had stepped outside the bounds of polite society, and therefore they could say outrageous things. And it was easy and it was effortless. Also, many of them were prominent only because they were working in dissident right circles. So Greg Johnson is a top 3 dissident right intellectual. If Greg Johnson were just a conservative, all right, would he amount to even the top 10,000 conservative intellectuals? All right, JF Gariepy was like a top 20 dissident right intellectual. If he was just a conservative, would he even figure in the top 10,000? No. So it's very easy to make a big splash in a small pond. My father was a rock star in Seventh-day Adventism, and he was a very controversial character. So the church thought, oh, we just transfer him to the United States, and he'll get lost in the bigger pond. So I could relatively effortlessly produce a blog on the porn industry every day that would get an average of 10,000 viewers. But when I did a blog about more mainstream topics, then I had to work a little harder to get even 2,000 viewers. It's a lot easier to make money writing on the porn industry. Just like for a few years on YouTube, it was a lot easier for marginal characters to make some decent coin and get some big audiences and think that they are, far more significant than they really are. So what JF is talking about here, just kind of a variant of another dissident right character here, like Mike Cernovich, right? So Mike Cernovich fed a niche that was outside of conservatism, that was alt-light, and he made a big imprint on this relatively small pond. If he'd just been working within the guidelines of conservatism, he would not have amounted to anything, but he got enormous attention because he was a significant figure in the small pond of the alt-light. So he gets that attention, and then he shows his delusional lack of reality by tweeting, when I think about how I'm only 42, there's a high degree of probability that I'll be remembered as one of the most significant Americans in history and perhaps people in world history. Guess what? There's zero chance that Mike Cernovich will be remembered as one of the most significant Americans in history. And there is absolutely zero chance that Mike Cernovich will be remembered as one of the most significant people in 2016, 2015, 2017, 2018, 2019, or 2020. He got to make a splash because he was serving a particular niche fairly effectively, and he did it without blowing himself up, unlike many of his peers. But when he says, I'm the most read person who people will not openly admit to reading in all of human history, that's just pure delusion. So you serve an underserved niche, you get viewers by providing content that is not provided by the mainstream, and then you get all these delusions of grandeur. It's like porn stars, right? If you're willing to suck and fuck on camera, right, and you're an 8, and you do it with enthusiasm, you can get millions of fans. But that doesn't mean you have as much significance as somebody working in a laboratory, a graduate assistant in a laboratory at a mid-level university who has 0 fans. So the assistant, the 25-year-old graduate assistant in a biology laboratory at some state college, all right, she is still 1,000 times more significant than the porn star sucking and fucking with millions of fans. So just because you have millions of fans, just because you get 4,000 live viewers to your blood sports show, does not mean that you have more significance than the person who's doing a live show for 5 people, right? The person who's doing like Godwin's podcast, right? Godwin's podcast may well be more significant than all sorts of podcasts with 1,000 times the listenership that he does. So it's very easy to confuse popularity, viewership, listenership, income with significance. Now, there is some work that is popular and significant, but generally speaking, famous people are rarely significant, and significant people are rarely famous.
Days when I came up with it.
What's interesting is that I think you correct me if I'm wrong, some people have suggested that you actually do like a show behind a paywall, but you rejected the idea because that sort of goes against the idea of disseminating knowledge for the public that you have, certainly that Paul and I have here at Kyle Godfrey. Do you think that this paywall business will be used by more people going forward, or do you think it's just sort of destined to fail?
I think there's a place for paywall business, but it's so contrary to my philosophy and coming from another era.
Look, come on. Don't give me this. Contrary to my philosophy. If you could make bank doing paywall, you'd do paywall, even if it's contrary to your philosophy. If you could double, triple your income, you'd go paywall. The reason you don't do paywall is you don't think that you'll make as much money that way.
Of the internet, which was the 2000 to say 2016 era of the internet. I see the internet as some people want to contribute to a show that will be viewed by the uneducated or the people who are not in our circles that already agree with us. And so that's what the internet brought, in my view. Now, it's less and less that way, precisely because of the circle jerks, the censorship and everything. But it would break my heart to do a paywall show. And given my size also, I mean, I'm one of the smallest possible full-time YouTuber. It's actually unbelievable that I make a living out of a show that makes 3,000 views sometimes. But I master this because I think that the people who contribute to the show want to see it continue. Not only are satisfied by the quality of the show for them, but they want the product to be available to a wider audience. They want to contribute to something that is public.
I agree entirely. And Kyle Godfrey has the members-only live streams, just as your show, the old one was monetized. It had its members-only live streams. When people talk about putting their show behind a paywall, that's something rather different. They're talking about like putting the whole damn thing so the public can't access it, so you get a very small number. And that's almost a waste of time, in my opinion, because it's exactly what you said. You're not communicating with the broader public. It becomes a circle jerk, really, and that's just not, to me, really, worthwhile. Even if it makes some money, it's just not, the satisfaction isn't there. It's good to be able to communicate with folks who perhaps have no idea what it is you're talking about, but by the end of the
Yeah, but if you're able to triple the amount of money you made, you'd all go paywall only if that worked. So who are the top 5 distant right intellectuals? I'd say Richard Spencer, Greg Johnson, Jared Taylor, Peter Brimlow, F. Roger Devlin. Those are some of the names. Oh, that academic from Croatia. His name will come to me.
The show they do know, and their lives are made a bit better for that knowledge.
Absolutely. And there's also the fact of having a live show. That's very different from having published videos. So under a paywall, not only would I reduce the potential crowd, but the people who could make it there live would be even smaller. And there's this whole sense in a live show of a family group. Everyone is together, and there's kind of a collective contribution to the show, which you wouldn't get under a paywall.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, paywalls, I guess we say they have their place, but they're certainly really a nuisance in my view. But, I do see why some people do them, so I don't want to get overly critical of them. Everybody goes their own way. But, getting, I suppose, into what we're discussing today, I will say that anybody has a reasonable, responsible question or comment for Jay, for myself, please do leave in the live chat as a super chat. And we will get to it, but please don't save it all for the end. Thank you very much in advance. So, Jay, looking at the media today and how it's handling allegations of fraud and irregularities in the 2020 election, one thing I find very interesting is that in 2016, there was far less evidence, if there was any evidence at all. You can make a case there wasn't, of fraud and irregularities there, which benefited Donald Trump. But I recall, and I've actually seen, articles from this time, with a lot of them have been taken down since, I think, about how the media said, there could have been fraud, there could have been hacks, could have been this, could have been that, blah, blah, blah. And now, when Trump has some very serious allegations of fraud, whether it be affidavits, whether it be mathematical formulas that show that essentially the impossible happened, the media is treating him essentially as some sort of seditionist for talking about election fraud. And obviously, election fraud is important regardless of what election season it is, because it speaks to the whole legitimacy of the system. But, Jay, have any opening thoughts on how the media has handled this matter in 2 very different election cycles?
Yeah, the media, it's amazing everything that's happening because the media doesn't hesitate at pulling all of the dirty tricks. And I would note that there's a couple of dirty tricks. First, there's the simple double standard that you mentioned. In 2016, and even back many elections ago, back in the George Bush days, you would hear intellectuals on the left really convinced that there was trickery, that there was suppression of votes, that there were various frauds, that there were dead people voting. So that was common on the left to be having this discourse as they were losing. Now that they are winning, there is a total shutdown on any discussion of fraud, and we've reached thresholds that were never reached before. I'm looking at the decision by the Pennsylvania judge, Patricia McCullough, who is now saying, based on the hearing from yesterday, that it is likely that the Trump team will prevail. She says that it is likely that the mail-in ballots will be judged all unconstitutional. You have a judge saying this at this point. It's not rumors. It's not people seeing stuff or stuff being reported in unreliable media. It's now been determined by a judge that most likely what will happen is that the mail-in ballots will be thrown out. But the left is absolutely uninformed on this. As far as they're concerned, it's a conspiracy theory. They will be faced in a couple of weeks from now for a rude awakening. And I would recommend them to watch the JF show maybe once or twice a week just to get into the mood progressively, to get informed progressively, because it's all going to fall on them like a hammer. The idea that, oh yeah, don't you...
Okay, count me as skeptical there. I think Michael Tracey is far more in touch with reality.
Rudy Giuliani, who did oral arguments, bizarrely, in this case, despite not having argued a case in federal court since 1992. Beavis quotes Giuliani as conceding the campaign, quote, doesn't plead fraud. And he further quotes Giuliani as reiterating, quote, if we had alleged fraud, yes, but this is not a fraud case. Okay, so if the fraud was so unambiguous, if it was so incontrovertible, if it was so obvious to anybody who's not just suffering from TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, why is it that the Trump campaign in its official suit in Pennsylvania, for which they're raising a lot of money, didn't even include a fraud allegation? Does that raise any questions for you? It probably ought to, I would think. And if it doesn't, maybe you need to self-assess. Okay, so I'm going to go for the first comment that I've received. Everything is Stupid says, Russiagate was such an embarrassment to Dems that left independent media was tricked into false equivalence. Watch Steven Crowder's Fraud Week. He's doing the work you should be doing. Oh, okay. So Steven Crowder is now the pinnacle of journalistic insight and wisdom. Right. I'm sure that he's applying rigorous standards that are unimpeachable to every fraud claim that is traversing his show. He couldn't possibly be responding to audience incentives as to what people want to hear. I'm sure it's just a completely impartial rendering of all these claims. And so if your suggestion is that I sit and watch hours upon hours of Steven Crowder on YouTube, as opposed to reading the federal lawsuits that the Trump campaign's official representatives have filed in court, then maybe that gives you a little bit of a hint as to the direction this is going. He's doing the work that I should be doing. So I should make it my specific objective in life to establish that Donald Trump lost the election due to fraud, not due to the pretty now explicable patterns that one sees across the country where the suburban, populous, metropolitan areas, which are gaining in population growth, which are now the power base within the Democratic Party, which will have leverage in terms of the governing strategy. That wasn't the reason for Trump's loss, even though it's a plainly identifiable trend as to the suburbs.
Right. Throughout the country, Trump lost votes in suburban areas. That's true in red states. It's true in blue states. That's why Trump apparently lost this election. Michael Tracey tweets tonight, there's no longer any active litigation in Pennsylvania challenging the election results, but don't worry, the dog and pony show will continue indefinitely. By the way, does anyone else find it odd that there's supposed to have been such obvious, demonstrable, pervasive fraud in Pennsylvania, but neither of these Trump lawsuits at the state or federal level alleged fraud of any sort? As the judge ruled, the absence of fraud allegations from this matter, not to mention actual evidence of fraud alone, is fatal to petitioners' claims. Tracey tweets, much of Atlanta actually trended slightly GOP, whereas the huge Democratic shifts were in the suburbs. This is consistent with urban-suburban trends nationwide. Maybe the fraud theories would be more plausible if they focused on the places where Democratic vote share actually did spike.
Increasingly becoming the bastions of Democratic political power. That's not a legitimate analytical framework to interrogate. What we have to do is watch Steven Crowder's Fraud Week. Okay, sure, I'll do that. So, in terms of the issue of the Russiagate comparison, look, you don't have to tell me. I put together a thread a few days ago based on information I had contemporaneously collected in 2016, this November, December of 2016, in which prominent people in the liberal media ecosystem were advocating, or at least floating, a scheme to subvert the Electoral College and decline to certify the results for Trump based on intelligence community leaks, which had kicked into high gear around that time through the CIA.
Okay, so are all these pundits and YouTube personalities who are pushing the massive voter fraud narrative, are they autistic? Are they just pandering? Alex writes, even if overturning the results of the election had legal merit, the probability the courts would decide in favor of it are basically nil. No idea why Jeff would claim it autism or pandering. Look, when your living depends upon something, you cannot be expected to have an open mind on the issue, right? if you would lose your living by acknowledging some inconvenient truth, you're not going to be able to acknowledge it. So whether the pandering is deliberate or not conscious, it doesn't really matter. If my living depended upon me telling you what you want to hear, then the things I could say would be shrunk like this, and it wouldn't really matter if I was consciously or unconsciously feeding you what you want to hear. But my living does not depend upon your super chats or joining the channel. That's just a nice bonus for me. But when your living depends, when your income depends upon telling people what they want to hear, then you're going to have to dish that out every day, whether you're doing it consciously or unconsciously.
NSA, John Brennan, that nexus, Comey. And clearly, the inevitability of a backlash to that harebrained scheme that many people in the liberal media had advocated, or at least floated in 2016, was obvious, which is why I contemporaneously collected the evidence. And if you'd like to see that, click on the Medium article that I wrote earlier this week, which contains that thread and contains other commentary on how incredibly predictable it was that in the event of an election which was regarded as even remotely close, you were clearly going to see a retribution initiative waged by Trump supporters, Trump's representatives, etc., in reaction to what was done in 2016. So that argument doesn't work on me. I mean, I was the one for years challenging the Russiagate narrative using my journalistic or analytical or whatever, not to my own horn, capacities. So this issue and Russiagate are just not really analogous, because what was Russiagate? It was a series of wild, extravagant claims that lacked sound evidentiary basis to further a partisan narrative. So while this isn't, quote, the same or equivalent, meaning election fraud stuff, the same capacities ought to be used to evaluate these affirmative claims that are fulfilling a partisan narrative. So I reject this idea that if you were skeptical of Russiagate, that necessarily compels you to be credulous about these claims. Everything is stupid. Yeah, sure, dismiss it out of hand. You didn't even give me a tangible. What I asked for is if you have a tangible evidentiary claim, then provide it. If your only answer is go watch Stephen Crowder's YouTube channel, that's not a compelling answer to my open call for tangible evidence in this regard. That's just you recommending a guy that you like to watch rant and crack stupid jokes on YouTube. I mean, I can get that any day of the week. Let's see. John Kasich. I don't know if that's the former governor of Ohio and former presidential candidate who spoke at the Democratic convention.
This is Michael Tracey speaking.
John Kasich says, massive Democrat disinformation and Facebook censorship rigged the election. Democrats push anti-Trump conspiracies and pay trolls while censoring the free press. Okay, so that's a much different claim than election fraud, in the sense of election fraud constituting the tampering with vote totals or the fraudulent casting of votes or something else to do with the actual administration of the election itself. This is a more broad-based political claim, which I think arguably has a fair degree of merit. I don't know that I would phrase it in exactly the way this individual did, but it's clear that unprecedented censorship tactics were employed at various points over the course of this campaign. The New York Post story and the Hunter Biden server emails being a paramount example. Democrats push anti-Trump conspiracies and pay trolls while censoring the free press. Sure, if you want to make an argument about the badness of Democratic political tactics, that's perfectly legitimate in my view. But that doesn't have explicit bearing on these election fraud claims that are supposed to relate specifically to the actual administration of this election. So that's a little bit of a conflation here. It's not that it's an unworthy topic, it's just that it's not responsive to the election fraud allegations that are now circulating and are so dominant if you populate any particular, if you populate certain kind of precincts on the internet. Estev, what are your thoughts on the recent Jacobin article where they admitted Trump wasn't technically a fascist? Well, I mean, I don't want to be too hard on Jacobin per se, but just the fact that you're getting so many of these admissions now tells you how phony and specious the campaign to depict Trump as a fascist really was over the course of the past 4 years. If Trump was a fascist, and let's just grant that the term fascist is so impossibly nebulous that it can mean all things to all people at all times. But at least if we think of a fascist, if one attribute of a fascist is that they can consolidate power by capitalizing on crises, by fomenting crises, by using the machinery of the state to entrench their own control of the state apparatus, Trump is the most feckless fascist possibly of all time. Because he had COVID he had COVID as an opportunity to consolidate power, just squandered that. He has now this post-election period as an opportunity to consolidate power, and he's just tweeting grandiose claims that have no bearing on any kind of firm litigation strategy. He's just allowing these state certifications to pass by. I mean, he had state certifications in Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, soon to be Arizona. Pennsylvania was certified this past week, although there's now a very technical challenge to that in a state court that, based on my reading, won't actually impede in any meaningful way the ultimate certification of those results, which have been certified. I mean, it's technical. I mean, I guess what they're trying to prevent in that Pennsylvania suit is the dispatching of the electors, although it's not clear what can actually be impeded at this point. But I mean, if you were a fascist, wouldn't you plan for an eventuality like this? Instead, it's just like Trump sitting in his office on his desk somewhere, ranting. I mean, if it's fascism, then the anti-fascists should be extremely pleased that the fascists are so ineffectual.
So I'm talking about this great book, Britain at Bay. It talks here in chapter 12 about how the British Expeditionary Force in 1940 was trapped around Dunkirk, and Winston Churchill and the leaders of the British Armed Forces were telling the British general in Dunkirk that he needed to fight his way out. He needed to fight south and west. And the general refused. He said, this is purely a fantasy. It's a scandalous Winstonian proposal. His divisions were already heavily engaged with the Germans. His men were tired from 9 days of marching. They were running low on ammunition and food. There's no way they could conduct a fighting advance across open country. But he did agree to make one limited counterattack southwards on the 21st of May, 1940. Just an ad hoc force of tanks, infantry, and artillery. Just kind of shows that sometimes when you just make a little bit of an effort, that you can get dramatic results. It was the only British offensive of the whole campaign. It was a confused encounter battle. For a short time, the British tanks ran amok. Enemy anti-tank shells simply bounced off the armor of the advancing British tanks. The German artillerymen fled, but then the British radio network broke down. The attack lost cohesion, and the British only had 16 of these Matilda tanks to start with. By nightfall, just 2 were still working, so they withdrew from the battlefield. Now, this counterattack did not alter the overall situation at Dunkirk one bit, but it inspired incredible alarm among the Germans out of all proportion to its real threat. So it wasn't only the Allies who were susceptible to panic in May of 1940. The German commander in this battle, an obscure Wehrmacht Major General called Erwin Rommel. This battle was his first encounter with the British, and it was the first significant opposition he and his troops had since crossing the Meuse River the previous week near the Ardennes. And Rommel wildly overreacted to it. He reported to his superiors he was being attacked by 5 British divisions. That was enough to persuade General von Rundstedt on the 22nd of May to halt any further progress until the threat had been contained. So for 24 hours, 5 German panzer divisions sat waiting to resist a British counterattack that existed only in the heads of their commanding officers. So much attention would be given later to Hitler's 48-hour halt order to his tank crews on the 24th of May, but the halt order 2 days earlier was far more significant. So there's a lot of thinking that Hitler ordered his panzers to halt to allow the British to withdraw and to make them more hospitable to suing for peace. But that's purely fantasy. First of all, it was the German generals on the ground who halted 2 days earlier than Hitler's order. That was far more significant. So the British troops were incredibly vulnerable. Also, if you watch the 2017 movie Dunkirk, you think that the British troops were largely rescued off of Dunkirk by civilians just sending their little boats across the English Channel to rescue the troops. But 90% plus of the troops were rescued by the regular Royal Navy. So the British general, he'd been ordered to engage in a much more substantial attack south and west. He refused. So sometimes by refusing orders from your superiors, you do the right things. He did the right thing. He saved the British army. They would have been wiped out if the general had followed the directions of Winston Churchill and the British Armed Forces hierarchy. So sometimes in life, you need to refuse orders from your superiors. Let's play a little bit more here from Michael Tracey.
To me, just to more directly address the point, it emphasizes or underscores how cynical or deluded or hysterical the depictions of Trump were. And it was really just done to enforce conformity within left liberal circles, so that you couldn't look beyond the alleged specter of a fascist president, because if it were true that he was a legitimately fascist president who was consolidating power, who had these authoritarian designs, etc., then it would make sense to focus exclusively on that purported threat. But the problem is that the depictions were just erroneous or wrong or fictitious. And so then you have to ask yourself, okay, what was the reason why they were so vehement about purveying that depiction? Well, it had certain discursive consequences just in terms of rehabilitating the Democratic Party, making left-wing activists feel as though they were on the cusp of history, and it was up to them to beat back this fascist threat that was reminiscent of the 1930s. And on. It was never about accurately describing the current, actually existing political circumstances. Okay, let's see.
Okay, so there's this widespread feeling that the French are simply incompetent, that they lost World War II because of civilizational decay, because of a lack of national character, a lack of national will. And really the story, right? There's no need to resort to deep theories about civilizational decline to explain what happened to France in 1940. Reading from this great new book, Britain at Bay, the epic story of the Second World War, 1938 to 1941. The reason the Third Republic fell was that its army failed to mount an effective counterattack against the German bridgeheads over the Meuse River between the 14th and 16th of May. That failure was the watershed. Before it, anything might have happened. After it, the most the Allies could have hoped for was a ceasefire, leaving Hitler in control of the Low Countries and northern France. But then events moved swiftly. By the 20th of May, even that outcome was highly unlikely. So the idea that France's army in 1940 was incredibly incompetent is not true. Like all armies on all sides, the French army in May 1940 was struggling to organize and equip and train and get ready for war. And like all the armies, it had some excellent units, it had average units, and it had poor units. It was France's particular misfortune that the critical battle of this war on the Meuse River took place between some of the best, most elite Wehrmacht combat forces and France's worst units. So the brilliance of the German army's overall victory in 1940 skewed the fact that its individual units did not always put on such an impressive performance. And when the balance of quality on the battlefield was even, the results were often very different from what we expect. So the French did fight until they were absolutely ordered to lay down their arms. Some of the French generals were not up to the job. Some of the English generals were not up to the job. But the French understood blitzkrieg principles as well as any other army at the time. They knew how to respond to them. One of the lessons of 1940 is that it is one thing to know in theory what to do in an emergency. It's quite another to be able to put it into practice when the emergency arrives. Now, it's not difficult to imagine a very different outcome to the drama of May 1940 had the French responded more coherently and vigorously to the threat at the Meuse River between the 14th and 16th of May. Then the Germans' daring breach of the line through the Ardennes might have turned into precisely the kind of fatal strategic trap that Liddell Hart predicted a year earlier, with the German panzers stuck in the narrow, congested Belgian forest roads, unable to advance or to escape. Had that happened, the fighting on the Western Front would have been bogged down by the end of the summer into an inconclusive stalemate. Hitler's great gamble would have failed. His armored units would have been irreplaceable. They would have been smashed on the Meuse River. The German army's offensive capability would have been shot. There would have been no second chance to conquer France. So the story of the Battle of France in 1940 is not one of militarism triumphing over meekness. It is not a story of innovation overcoming stagnant thinking. For all the glamour attached to Blitzkrieg, it was the Germans, not the Allies, who planned to fight the campaign in the spring of 1940 on strictly traditional, old-fashioned lines. They had no time for novel theories like strategic bombing. Their conception of what they must do to win was one that Bismarck, Napoleon, and Alexander the Great, for that matter, would have understood without difficulty. To use ground forces to smash a way through the enemy's defenses, defeat its armies, compel its surrender by the physical occupation of its territory was a time-worn, hackneyed idea how to fight a war, which happened to work brilliantly on this occasion. Now, the British were spared defeat. They withdrew. They managed to rescue almost all their soldiers from France. It was the French armies that collapsed, and the British concluded that the alliance with France had been part of the problem, and they felt glad to be rid of the French. But the defeat in France in 1940 was at least partly to do with the British, because they never mounted much of an expeditionary force. All that France wanted from the British was not a major army. They just wanted 2 or 3 fully equipped armored divisions, decent tanks. The British did not supply these, and that was the difference between a stalemate, between victory and defeat. The British withdrew from Dunkirk without asking the French first. And then 3 weeks after Dunkirk, they withdrew a second British expeditionary force from France again without asking French permission. And then a few weeks later, they sunk the entire French Navy. So after 1940, the British looked back at Dunkirk as the place they rediscovered their true nature. The French could only agree, though for very different reasons. They believed that Dunkirk revealed what the British were truly like. They cannot resist the call of the ports. The French soldiers left behind in the wreckage of Dunkirk would have needed a superhuman dose of charity not to feel bitter as they saw ship after ship drawing away from the shore, carrying their foreign companions in arms to safety. Here, heroes they may have been, but they were not saints. Churchill, who stuck by the French longer than most of his countrymen, ultimately decided that British survival in 1940 mattered more than loyalty to the Alliance. So loyalty is a great value, but it's not the ultimate value. Sometimes you need to put your own survival or your own well-being ahead of loyalty. French attitude was, we entered this war together, so we should fight to the end together. If we can no longer win, let us at least battle the Germans to a standstill to get the best possible peace terms for us both. Churchill's attitude was, the only thing that matters in the end is that one of us fights on, and he was ultimately correct. France's defeat was not decisive for Britain. Eventually, France was liberated by an expeditionary force dispatched from southern England. So the British decision to abandon France after Dunkirk may not have been very noble, but it was the right decision to make under the circumstances. So sometimes we are called upon to do things that are not noble, that are not heroic, but they are still the best things to do under the circumstances.
I'll only note that I still have yet to receive a specific... Okay, so Jesse Martin says, have you looked at Matt Brainerd's analysis? I find convincing he runs the Voter Integrity Project. Okay, so first of all, I've seen people sending me this. This person is not a disinterested party, first of all, right? I mean, he was a former Trump campaign operative. And what I'm being sent here, what I'm being sent here is a YouTube video of a guy with a Trump Pence placard behind him talking to a camera. Now, my question would be, why aren't any of his claims in easily in like a digestible open source format, let's say in text, or even better yet, in a court filing that could be distributed as opposed to a YouTube video? So I can't sit right now and watch a full 43-minute YouTube video. And you know, there are plenty of journalists on the right who, if this person was so sure that what he was identifying is constitutive of systemic widespread fraud, give it over to the Washington Examiner, give it to the National Review, give it to Fox News. I know people don't like Fox News now, who are Trump supporters, but whatever. Give it to give it to me. Give me a full list of the claims that can be independently evaluated, and we'll look at it. But the point is that you can't just stay siloed in your little Trump supporting online circles with your Trump Pence placard in the background as a former Trump campaign operative and assume that that's going to pass muster for people who want independent, credible evaluation of these things. And if there is a specific claim that he's making somewhere that constitutes deliberate systematic fraud, then put it in the comments and I'll address it. Don't just send me a 45-minute YouTube video that I have to sit and watch while I'm on stream. John Kasich makes some additional points. So all I'll say is, because we're going a half hour here and I haven't got a specific allegation that's responsive to the open call I put out, as expected, frankly. And so let's just take a step back here. The states are certifying the results. The legal challenges are essentially going nowhere. I mean, read the federal lawsuit, or the federal lawsuit being dismissed yesterday. People are still fixated on this Sidney Powell issue. I mean, please. That person is like schizophrenic. And she was fired by Trump. So if Trump thought that Sidney Powell had the key to keeping him in power for 4 years, why would he have fired her? Did anybody think of that? Does that make sense to anybody? Everything's stupid ads. You're asking for evidence. When told about Crowder and Brainerd's work, you just refuse to look into it. Independent left debasing themselves. I'm asking you for what I asked for was simple. Provide evidence that is responsive to my query. My query was, please provide a specific, tangible piece of evidence that demonstrates widespread systematic fraud. Now, if you just say, search on YouTube for my favorite political commentary guy who tells jokes about, college kids with pink hair, that's not responsive to my claim. What, you think I'm just going to, as I'm right now doing the stream, watch hours and hours of Steven Crowder on YouTube? Like that to you is responsive to my question? That I think should probably cause you to question the veracity of, or the intelligibility of what you're trying to argue here. What do the Dems have on you, Trader? Asks Neon Noir. To my knowledge, nothing. I remember being asked over the whole course of the Russiagate fiasco similar questions, but from a different angle, which was, what does Putin have on you? What does Trump have on you? You must secretly support Trump. You must secretly have this underhanded motive that you're concealing from everybody, and that's the only explanation for why it is you're saying what you're saying. No, I'm just trying to go proceed as rationally as possible. And what can I tell you? Now, in terms of the affidavits, one thing that you'll hear in terms of these generalities that are thrown at you is there are so many affidavits. What is an affidavit? An affidavit is, yes, a signed statement, but it's a statement from somebody who could be mistaken. It's a statement from somebody who could have confirmation bias. It's a statement from somebody who could have an erroneous understanding of the various procedures that they're observing. So an affidavit is like nothing unless it can be tested, independently evaluated, and challenged. And thankfully, some of these affidavits have been evaluated by an independent arbiter, which is the court system. And you can go and check a ruling that was issued in Wayne County, Michigan, on November 13th by a duly vested member of the state judiciary who went through a number of these affidavits and just said not that the affiants, meaning people who wrote the affidavits, are lying, but that they just have mistaken information or their impressions are not consistent with the fraud that's being insinuated. So, for example, there's this woman who claims that in the Detroit County Center, her name is, hold on, let me find it here. There's a woman named Jessie Jacob who says that Michigan election laws are violated. And here's how the judge summarizes her claims. Quote, Ms. Jacob's information is generalized. It starts behavior with no date, location, frequency, or names of employees. Ms. Jacob only came forward after the unofficial results of voting indicated former Vice President Biden was the winner in the state of Michigan. And her allegations of stuff like predating ballots and signatures not being checked in the correct location are contravened by testaments that are factual for people who actually know what they're talking about, which is that there was no need for comparison of signatures at the center, the TSF Center of Detroit, where this person claims that they were wrongly not compared. It had happened in a different location. That's just one example of an affidavit, which, like, I mean, an affidavit is, I could write an affidavit saying that I believe the moon is made of cheese right now. And if I just sincerely believe that, doesn't mean I'm lying. It means that it would then have to be tested or checked, and my lawsuit would probably be dismissed because it's foolish. What this all comes down to, I think, is a bizarre unwillingness for a lot of people to just believe a few simple realities as to American politics, which is that Hillary Clinton didn't lose the previous election by a huge margin. She lost by a significant margin in the Electoral College, but the states, the three states that Trump won, that won in the Electoral College, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, were not decided by a huge margin. So if you have a nationwide shift that is in the Democratic direction, you would expect those states to have a likewise similar shift that could be enough to get by the election. I mean, why is it that people think it's so insane that Joe Biden is 2 or 3 percentage points more popular than Hillary Clinton, and that was sufficient to give him a victory? I mean, Biden's popular vote percentage nationwide is 51.1, and Hillary's in 2016 was 48.2. Like, I mean, it staggers you and stuns you that Joe Biden could be 2 or 3 percentage points in a marginal sense more popular than Hillary Clinton. I mean, sometimes the simplest explanation is the most reliable one. And so, if you want to read how I have characterized how the election fraud backlash in 2016 that was conducted by Democrats and liberals made inevitable the current backlash that we're seeing now, though they're not.
You realize there's been complaints in the courts for 2-3 weeks now, and they won. And they're winning in Pennsylvania, and Trump is saying he's going to do the exact same thing in Wisconsin.
They're not winning in Pennsylvania.
A heightening of threshold of demonstration by the mainstream media, which is absolutely dishonest. They will always complexify the sentence that you need to prove to satisfy them. So at first it was, there is no evidence of fraud. Well, evidence of fraud is damn easy to be found. Okay? Evidence of fraud is one guy saying, I saw fraud. We have thousands of them. So they abandoned pretty much this. There's no evidence of fraud. They switched to, there's no evidence of massive fraud. There's no evidence of systemic massive fraud that could change the outcome of the election. And all of this is...
Look, because you have one guy saying, I saw fraud, that's not evidence of fraud. That's potential evidence of fraud. I could say, I saw Joe Biden smoking crack, right? That's not evidence that Joe Biden smoked crack. I could do an affidavit saying that Joe Biden smoked crack. Still, that's not evidence of that Joe Biden smoked crack. So this is the downside when you make your living telling people what you want to hear, is that... and you're doing a show every day, you start talking about a lot of things that you don't know anything about and that are just completely ludicrous, like this statement that because one person says he saw fraud, that's evidence of fraud. No, that's not evidence of fraud. I could say that I saw Ricardo smoking crack. That's not evidence that Ricardo smokes crack.
Red herring, because I don't know that the current legal cases are mostly reliant on fraud demonstration. There is some mention of fraud, for example, in the Sidney Powell complaint in Georgia, but the direction that Trump is taking is much more radical and much more legal. It is the idea that the executive powers across states and some of the legislatures have been opting for modes of voting that are simply not allowed under their own constitution, for example, in the case of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, and perhaps not allowed at all under the U.S. Constitution. And what I've been recommending to Trump from the beginning, from 2 weeks ago, I said, Trump, go boldly. Trump, go for a complete canceling of mail-in practices across the nation.
Yeah, why didn't Trump listen to J.F. Gariepy, noted expert on election procedures, noted expert on voter fraud? Why didn't Trump listen to JF? It's
honey baked ham and
absolute shanda.
Sweet potatoes and dinner rolls to go with the ham, and mustard, some other potatoes. We kind of had 2 potatoes going, and it was very good.
No turkey?
But no turkey. I'm not I don't know. I guess I only would eat turkey on Thanksgiving. I'm not a big turkey fan, but I kind of prefer a turkey alternative, like ham. But there are a lot of actual turkeys out here. It's kind of funny.
And people reserve for Christmas.
True, but I guess we're rule breakers.
Wow, sounds like he's having a great Thanksgiving. Richard Spencer here, talking on
I'm in my swing on my
Fortune's
front porch here in the deep south.
right-wing populism.
I didn't vote for Trump. Time for me to be
aka
doxxed
Hunter
for
Wallace.
not voting for that guy.
But
So, yeah,
again,
so speaking
I
of-
love all these guys, as I was saying before, where they're like, "Oh, I'm super critical of Trump," or whatever. They're like, "Oh, I'm third position," or like, "I'm alts," whatever. And then they like viciously attack anyone who doesn't vote for Republicans.
There were
You know,
there
it's
were
like,
a bunch
I
of
think
people.
Trump's a fan.
There were a bunch of people who like at the very last moment like flipped back to Trump.
Yeah.
And that night of the election, when I was drunk and I was like, "Hey, look, it looks like Trump is doing great." I was congratulating him, and then like I passed out and I woke up the next morning and it all turned around. And
yeah,
you know, from that point on, they just got angrier and angrier and angrier and angrier that he lost, and a bunch of them unfollowed me because I was making fun of him for losing.
Oh,
yeah. So they're just
Okay, so he passed out drunk. Yeah, this sounds like someone, a reputable analyst. I wonder what he has to say. Some guy's got a drinking
they're
problem.
just. I mean, they're just highly emotional right now. They think Trump's going to still. 97% of his voters think he's still going to win. And
and Brad Griffin's not highly emotional. Hunter Wallace is not highly emotional. Richard Spencer is not highly emotional.
There are a couple of things going on here, and there's some big picture things that I want to talk about, and then there's also some small picture things in the sense of like what's happening with the alt-right and so on. Maybe let's do the big picture first. So I think you and we've done a couple of podcasts over the last month or so, and we both agreed that no matter who won, the other side would say honey baked, and they'd just be in search of an argument to claim illegitimacy. And so if Trump had won, we would have the Russia narrative would have been revived. And maybe some other new narrative entered, would enter out of the woodwork. And in fact, the whole Diebold voting machines, I've been hearing that for like 20 years about how.
Yeah, it's not the first time.
No, it's not, and it's generally a left-wing thing. I would hear this about George Bush, and it's like
it
Halliburton's
was
a
John Kerry.
co-owner of Diebold or whatever. I can't even remember.
Bush stole Ohio. It was Bush stole Ohio in 2004 from John Kerry by hacking the voting machine. That's
right. And so this is the point, is that they have a conclusion and they're in search of an argument. And you can see this with but again, just to be perfectly fair and not seem like I'm some Democratic partisan, I actually think we would have seen the exact same hysteria, maybe worse, in fact, if Trump had won. I'm by no means trying to leave out any side that claim that they're not guilty of this, but you can see this in the lawsuits themselves, where they're like making, and these lawsuits are getting tossed out of court left and right. I think all but one of them has been tossed out, unless I'm incorrect. But they're in search of evidence. They're like, we know that something's going on here, so like let's go find the evidence now. And it's not really how it works. I mean, maybe if you're a policeman, you can kind of act in that way, but you just can't act in that way, or at least, I mean, when you're doing actions. I mean, this is it reminds me of a case that I'm involved in where they more or less claimed that, and it's lasted for a while. But yeah, they're both sides are kind of in their own world. And the other thing that I was thinking is, I actually watched the YouTube videos of this. I mean, I guess you could call him an intelligent academic grifter, but his name's Steve Turley. And I've actually, even though I disagree with him on a lot, he actually is an intelligent guy. I think he has a PhD from the Durham University, and just where Ed Dudden went, and so on. So he's a smart guy. I learned something. I kind of disagree with him, so it kind of sharpens my knife, so to speak, to listen to him. But nevertheless, he's still on this Team Red. And I was thinking to myself, like, as people increasingly watch less mainstream media and they tune in to Facebook, your favorite YouTube personality, Tim Pool, Steve Turley, whatever. Because Steve Turley gets like 250,000 views on every video. I mean, he has an audience, like, it's larger than ours, just for what it's worth. But yeah, if you tune in only to Steve Turley, Tim Pool, all these characters, if you're, talking to your uncle on your Facebook and he's giving you conspiracy theories, you might very well think that like Trump is winning and that the liberals are running for the hills and they're, pulling their hair out and biting their nails because they know they've been had. I mean, the level of like macro narrative divergence, I don't think it's ever been this strong.
Especially with people who are online. Like,
yeah,
from my understanding, like normal conservatives or Trump supporters who aren't, big into a Facebook group or Twitter or whatever, have kind of accepted it more. They're like, oh, he lost. But like these extremely online types are the ones who cling to this Trump thing. Like, oh, he actually won.
Yeah. And they think he is winning. I mean, it's not even like a theory. Like, they think that this is all moving forward towards a victory. It's just bizarre.
Did you see that Tucker Carlson lost like half his audience? And so did like a lot of. It was that dramatic. He lost like half the audience. Like it's all over Fox. Yeah, half the Fox News audience like is rebelling right now against Fox because they're all mad.
Well, they'll go to OWN and they'll go to Newsmax, which is, I didn't even know that was a channel now, but it's not just a web channel. It's actually on.
It's still around apparently.
Yeah, I mean, I have not paid attention to them for years, anyway, but whatever. I mean, they've developed an audience. But the other thing, I think Fox News is in a difficult situation because, first off, you have like Ailes is out. and Murdoch's sons seem to be taking over, and they're of a different. I think they're around the same age as I am. They're just kind of a different era, and they also want to be taken seriously in some fashion. And they kind of know that they're the Republican wing of this, but they want to be taken seriously. And I think they will pump up stuff. And Tucker wants to be taken seriously. I think he kind of intelligently recognized that, the trap door is about to open below us, so we've got to take a step back. But they want to be taken seriously, but then also they want to pump up right-wing kind of goofiness when it doesn't really have any consequences. So like the Fox News was like the Tea Party channel 10 years ago. they would cover like some rally in Des Moines, with like 20 people. They'd be like, "This is amazing footage. Like the people are rising up. Like we've got to talk about this."
They're just rising up right now.
Yeah,
the same thing was they're doing the same thing with the anti-lockdown protests.
Right.
Back in I think April and May, they were pumping look at these demonstrators who are rising up against the tyrannical lockdowns. So they tried to do that earlier this year. Although this time they're in a I would say in a pretty bad spot. Like we said, like we both agreed, the main take before the election for 6 months was no matter who won the election, the other side there's absolutely no chance the other side was ever going to acknowledge that they legitimately lost. And we're in that point though. If you look back at what we said before the election, maybe we were too quick to assume that they would acknowledge it was over because Hawley 2024 hasn't launched, Tucker 2024 hasn't launched, none of that has launched. They're all sticking with Trump, who insists he won the election. And so in fact, like and so much of the Republican base is just so absolutely glued to this narrative that things aren't really happening like they normally would, where they have the post-election civil war Republican Party. And so all that's been postponed. I guess Trump's
and they didn't have that because we could at least imagine a scenario in which the GOP told Trump no and told him no hard, and that's kind of where they were 4 years ago. I mean, remember the GOP, they were just drag kicking and screaming into the Trump movement, and they eventually got there by the summer of 2016. But it was a difficult situation, and so. But now, I mean, the GOP they put out a tweet endorsing Sidney Powell like 5 or 6 days ago now, and you just can't take that back. Like
did you see that? Did you see
screenshotted?
She unleashed the Kraken last night around like midnight.
Has the Kraken been unleashed? And I just
in Georgia and
Donald Trump is the president again.
In Georgia and Michigan, she unleashed the Kraken last night. It was like, oh my god. And then there some kind of Pennsylvania voter fraud hearing, and Trump called into it. And Sternbush was like, "Wow, did you see Pennsylvania happen? Wow." And they're just none of this is going anywhere, in my view. No. And according to Trump, is if he
looks like Fox News has moved on. The Greg Gutfeld show right now discussing what was your worst vacation, and on Newsmax they were discussing which anchor had the bluest eyes.
Electoral college votes to say Joe Biden's the president, he'll leave. Of course, he'll never concede victory, but I mean that's just his excuse for face saving and getting out. So I guess this will go on to mid-December. Looks like.
If not January 20th. Well, yeah. When do they do that? It is like December 13th or 15th or something. When
it's something like mid-December.
Actually votes. Yeah. And they're still holding out hope. Like there is this so-called nuclear option of, in the words of Darren Beattie, of convincing the Electoral College voters and so on. I give that. I think 1% chance is extremely generous. And if they did that, that would cause its own just tremendous problems because you have kind of like, I mean, what is it now? The Republicans have lost the popular vote 7 out of 8 last elections, or 8 out of 9.
About 4 points. It's about 4 points and going up this time. So
right, and so obviously I recognize that the popular vote does not, determine the president. Of course not, but it does. I mean, we live in a democratic society. This does give legitimacy.
Okay, so I love this new book, Britain at Bay. It touches on eternal issues, guys, and it's talking here about how democracy itself could not be trusted in a crisis. This was the conclusion of Britain's elites in the dire summer of 1940. Only by abandoning the present rather easygoing methods of national life and adopting a set of restrictions which would approach the totalitarian could Britain survive a Nazi onslaught. The cabinet was warned by Neville Chamberlain on the 18th of May. So every functioning democracy contains significant elements of constitutional dictatorship. And we see this over the past 9 months in reaction to the threat of COVID. We've lost all sorts of rights. Just take it away like that. The governor decrees, the mayor decrees, and suddenly all sorts of rights that you took for granted, they're no longer available because the circumstance will determine, in conjunction with whoever has power, what rights you get. It's not, your rights are not guaranteed by the Constitution. Right? That's a nice sounding, pleasant sounding mythology, but it's not true. If the mayor, if the governor can get law enforcement to follow his lead, and he usually will be able to, then simply the mayor and the governor can just decide like that to take away your rights. Now, you have redress to the courts, which may take days, weeks, or months. But for a certain standard of time, days, weeks, or months, whatever the mayor or the governor decides, that determines what rights you get. And if you are fighting against a particularly formidable enemy, whether it's COVID or the Nazis, if you can claim an emergency, then people with power can abrogate all of your rights. So Britain, facing the Nazi onslaught, saw that they would have to let go of their easygoing methods of national life with all their rights and adopt essentially totalitarian restrictions. To fight a totalitarian enemy, sometimes you have to go totalitarian yourself. The legal apparatus, such a siege dictatorship, was established 4 days later when a new Emergency Powers Defense Act was passed by the Commons in its entirety in just 2 hours. Just 2 hours. This was an extension of the existing emergency legislation passed at the outbreak of the war in September of 1939. Now gave the government unlimited authority to regulate people, property, and capital without the need for parliamentary scrutiny. So to pay for the war, the British government had the ability to take money from people, to take property from people, to move people, to do anything that they needed to do to survive. So the new Minister for Labour noted that this new legislation made him a Führer with powers to order anybody anywhere. A treachery act passed the same day made it a capital offense to assist the enemy's military operations or even to hamper Britain's own. The Emergency Powers Act comes near to suspending the very essence of the Constitution. As it has been built up in 1,000 years, our ancient liberties are placed in pawn for victory, and it will always be such. When survival is on the line, your liberties go out the window. A slew of regulations soon circumscribed even the most quotidian features of the British citizen's life. It was unlawful to endeavor to influence public opinion in a manner likely to be prejudicial to the war effort, to take part in a strike. So in Australia, in the middle of World War II, the wharfies, the people bringing in goods from ships, I forgot the proper term for wharfies, these unions, they repeatedly went on strike in the middle of the war, and Australia needing, vital materials to defend itself against the Japanese onslaught, and the bloody wharfies are going on strike. And when Japanese bombers are coming in to bomb Darwin, the Australians manning the radar station are on smoke break, smoko. It was unlawful to take part in a strike. It was unlawful to withhold information about an invention or patent if the state demanded it. It was unlawful to hold an unauthorized procession. It was unlawful to put out flags, to operate a car radio, or to put icing on a cake because it was a wicked waste of sugar. Neville Chamberlain hoped the public opinion would back these restrictions, and it did. Those who opposed them could be put into essentially concentration camps. Private citizens in Britain responded to the news of German parachute landings in the Netherlands and Belgium by announcing the formation of ad hoc militia companies to defend their homeland. So this new ad hoc militia swelled to 1.5 million. So 1.5 million armed men are roaming around, barely trained. They're operating under only the loosest military discipline. Whitehall's trying to control the process. And all these armed men walking around essentially with the notion that you shoot first and ask questions later. So, of course, there was disaster after disaster. So if you had a noisy muffler and you didn't hear instructions to stop, you might get shot. So all sorts of innocent Britons were in great danger from their very own militia. They're in far greater danger from their own militia during this time than from the Germans. Now, if anything, the government was criticized for not giving the public enough of a martial role. So Trump probably erred in psychological and political terms by not cracking down hard enough on COVID. Many people probably wanted stricter, firmer enforcement. So the British people reacted to the restrictions by really requesting more. This whole drama of an air attack and possible invasion gave the war a revivifying psychological intensity absent throughout the dreariness of its first 8 months of war. Every man now his own Achilles, every woman her own Hippolyta. Wartime sacrifices, restrictions ceased to irritate, as they had previously done, with the sense people now had of being characters in a great national epic. So if Trump had whipped people up to being characters in this great national epic in the war on COVID, he probably would have tapped into something. So yes, it was frightening in the immediate moment, but they knew they could look back on this time with pride. Reading about the Dunkirk evacuation from her home, housewife Nella Last felt that I forgot I was a middle-aged woman who often got tired and had backache. The story of Dunkirk made me feel part of something that was undying and never old. Somehow I felt everything to be worthwhile, and I felt glad I was of the same race as the rescuers and the rescued. So when times get dire, people usually substantially up their degree of in-group allegiance, and with that comes suspicion and hatred of outgroups. According to the author Verily Anderson, then a 25-year-old first aid nursing volunteer, even the very colors of the summer seemed heightened. The sky seemed bluer. The clouds seemed whiter, and the darkness seemed darker. The manufactured contrivances of the theater were struggling to compete with this new melodramatic reality. That's why publishers didn't release many books during summer of 2016, because they didn't want to compete with Hillary versus Trump. What is happening on the stage of history is so tremendous, most thinking people find it difficult to take their eyes off the real thing. The footlights are already up, and the orchestra is swinging into the somber and terrible overture. So Britain, by the summer of 1940, had become a very unfamiliar place. Policemen were walking their beats with pistols. Armed guards protected bus garages at night. The army was mining bridges and beaches. There were over 28,000 pillboxes and gun emplacements hastily constructed, so hasty that they were often facing the wrong way.
And you are a little bit tainted if you didn't win the popular vote, even though you are, certainly legally president. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that him just staying on, I mean, that would also just create huge chaos. And so I don't even know what it would look like.
What were our pre-election predictions?
I overestimated Biden. So I thought that Biden would hit Obama era numbers.
In the 330s, yeah.
Yeah, I think I said 325 or something, but yeah. Mm-hmm. So I was a bit, I picked the right victor, but I was a bit off. I underestimated, it wasn't even so much overestimating Biden, because he did benefit. I mean, Trump is right when he says that this is a mail-in, flood, and that clearly has been benefiting Biden. And Trump made it benefit Biden, I should add, because he delegitimized mail-in votes. But, I think I underestimated, I think I was in my own head a little too much, being just pissed off at Trump. And
the blue wave. You thought it was Richard's official prediction that it was going to be a blue wave. Actually, but technically it was a blue wave. I mean, Biden won by 4 points, but the thing is that the House is so gerrymandered and the Democrats are so concentrated in these cities that I mean, they have to win by 4 or 5 points.
Hold on. In 2018, they won by close to 10. They won by 9 points if you aggregate all House races. Yeah, and so that was larger than any red wave. So these, like 94 and 2010, I mentioned this in my piece on this, and I'm kind of writing a piece called What the Hell Happened, which is kind of like the next stage of this. But the 94 revolution and 2010 Tea Party election, I think the Republicans won by like 5 or 6 points. The 2018 was a wave election, like 100%. They won by like 9 percentage points. And I don't think they went down too much. So we're just seeing like cascades of blue, and but again, like Republicans spin this like as if they won something.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually, I mean, this election was, I mean, when I looked at, I mean, you can see the swing map. It was pretty much like static, except in certain key suburban areas and around Miami and the Texas border. Yes. That's what stands out about it. I mean, it was really a status quo election, except that the famous defection of
the famous defection of his strategy.
Some white guys.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Nick Fuentes tweets, in the future, we will vet anybody who claims to be a patriot by asking them, which rallies did you attend during the election coup in 2020? I see a lot of people on the sidelines, and we won't forget that. Right, back to this great book, Britain at Bay, the epic story of the Second World War, 1938 to 1941. During the 1930s, Britain generally did not want refugees. Refugees were said to be interlopers, stealers of jobs, and benefit scroungers. The British Medical Association refused to recognize the credentials of German doctors for fear of professional competition. Daily Mail warned that misguided sentimentalism about the plight of refugees from the Third Reich would lead to the floodgates being opened and we should be inundated. The trade unions were opposed to refugees. The true loyalties of aliens in Britain were said to be to their home nations. Winston Churchill warned Parliament in July 1937 there may be 40,000 Germans or Italians in this country at any given moment, all of whom were receiving political instructions from their overseas governments. After Kristallnacht, the Home Secretary received a delegation of backbench Tory MPs unhappy about the volume of Jewish refugees entering Britain. In February 1939, the King, disturbed by reports that German Jewish emigres were illegally entering Palestine, wrote to Lord Halifax, Foreign Secretary, expressing the hope that steps are being taken to prevent these people leaving their country of origin. The Jews need to stay in Germany. Foreign Secretary promptly asked the British ambassador in Berlin to urge Hitler's government to prevent the unauthorized emigration of Jews. Halifax later admitted he'd always been anti-Semitic. An attempt to start an imperial settlement scheme for German Jews outside of Palestine got nowhere, thanks to problems with costs and objections from colonial administrators. Kenya's governor was willing to accept the right type of Jew, but thought their presence on a large scale would be an undesirable feature in his colony. In June 1939, the scurrilous anti-Semitic magazine Truth, surreptitiously run by Neville Chamberlain's party fixer Sir Joseph Ball, still complaining that London was crawling with foreign undesirables, and that one of the mysteries of this present time is how the refugees who are pouring into Great Britain managed to present such a well-fed, well-dressed, and cheerful, not to say arrogant, appearance. The invasion of Poland might have been expected to increase sympathy for Hitler's victims. If anything, the opposite was true. All Germans, no matter their religion or political views, no matter if they were Jews, were now the enemy. Popular anti-Semitism, always widespread, but hitherto too impolite to be expressed too loudly in public, had been given a new respectability by the press's obsession with the fifth column, meaning German Jewish refugees. It had been quite the done thing to speak your dislike of Jews out loud. So someone close to me didn't like it when her father started complaining very loudly about the Jews in the 1940s and 50s. On the day the Germans invaded Belgium, a London City Council alderman complained, the idea of Germans taking charge of Britons in an air raid is grotesque. He's referring here to German Jewish emigres to Britain, particularly as it is 10 chances to 1 that the man dropping bombs is his cousin or some relative. These German refugees are nationals of an enemy country. However much they may dislike the government now in power, deep down they must have a love for their native land. 2/3 of people polled by Gallup felt that the British government had been too lenient with aliens. Only 2% thought it had been too strict. So Germans, Jewish, not Jewish, Italians got rounded up and interned. Henry Price, who became a distinguished professor of modern languages, had come to Britain from Germany in February 1939 as a teenager. When war broke out, he tried to enlist in the British Army, was turned down. Following July, he was interned. He was eventually released in December 1940. He recalls, from 1936 onwards, you had become so accustomed to an insecure existence that you did not find injustice surprising. You were conditioned to the fact that life was going to be insecure from then on. When he was released, the police gave him a form to fill out, which, among other things, asked him if he had ever been in prison. November to December 1938, Buchenwald, on the charge of being a Jew. July to December 1940, Honchan, on the charge of being a German.
And I, of course, take singular credit for that. It would not have happened without me and maybe you. No, just
Yeah,
kidding. We
it was totally arguing. It was totally arguing.
If you had not
We have
tweeted
an
about
enormous
that,
audience.
Yeah. Well, we don't have an invisible audience, but what I'm saying is, obviously, like it's not so much like I just do something and this happens. Like I'm kind of part of the wave as much as I push the wave in my own little small way. But I think a lot of people did read, and they probably saw a tweet or read an article or saw their friend on Facebook tweeting about like the fact that I was voting for Biden. I think I had a minute impact. It was small, but it was what it was. I think you did too.
Yeah, it was people.
It was what it was.
Always on a Sunday, a program of religion on the move. Let there be light.
If your baby does you wrong, turn the other cheek. Keep it turning, 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 turning. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Turn the other cheek. Now we want your thoughts, dear king. Hey, don't think you are sorry if you turn the other cheek. Keep it turning. All right, boys, let go. Let go.
That looked as spiffing. It really had my feet tapping. Now let's get down to God. God, who is he? Where is he? And above all, why is he? And of course, why is he above all? Have you got any questions you'd like to fire off about God, Dudley?
Yes, well, Vicar.
Oh, now don't call me Vicar, call me Dick. That's the sort of vicar I am.
Yes, well, Dicker. One thing has always been a great mystery to me, and that is the exact age of the Almighty. I mean, how old is God?
How old is God?
How old is God? God, how old is he? Oh, God, how is he?
That's very good. Jolly good. Yes, good. Jolly good. Good. Yes. Good God. Well, it isn't really a question of age with God, you see, Dudley, because you see, God is ageless. Well, that's to say, he's age-old. He's old age, isn't right? In fact, God is exactly the same as you or I. And that's the message I'm trying to get across to you youngsters down at my little Dockland parish of St. Jack in the Lifeboat. You see, I think we've got to get right away from this stuffy old idea of thinking of God as something holy or divine. Once we can do that, we'll get you youngsters flooding back into the churches. I know that for sure. Alan. Hello there, Alan. Hello, Alan. Come on, Alan, tell me, is there anything in the Bible which actually puts you off religion?
Yes, there is actually, Dick. Excuse me, Alan, do you mind? Can we leave Lot's wife till late? Thank you very much. During my studies of the good work, Dicker, I was very shocked by all the cruelty and violence in the New Testament.
In the New Testament?
Yes.
I knew there was some rough and tumble in the Old, but I always thought the New was rather mild.
No, I thought there was some ghastly bits in it. Take, for example, the horrible case of shoving a needle up the eye of a camel. Frankly, Dicker, that to me is taking unfair advantage of a dumb animal. A dumb camel, thank you, Peter, I stand corrected. It's a ghastly sight, the ship of the desert standing there with a needle up his eye. And if you ask me, that was the straw what broke the camel's back.
Well, there you go. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think we're putting words into God's mouth here, and I think we can turn a blind eye on the whole affair. After all, the camel had to. My joke. I am very grateful to you, Dudley, for bringing this up, because it does bring me to the whole problem of teenage violence in general. Now, there's been an awful lot of Tommy Rot spoken about juvenile and teenage violence, because I think we can actually use this violence and channel it towards God. In fact, it's my aim to get this violence off the streets and into the churches where it belongs. In the old days, people used to think of the saints as pious old milksops. Well, they weren't. The old saints were rough, toothless, as well. They were tough, ruthless terrorists who knew where they were going. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John went through life with their heads screwed on.
Went outside with nothing on, had a bathe in the village.
Thank you very much. That's the little rhyme we all sing, and with these principles firmly in mind, we've now got ourselves a young, vigorous church where youngsters like yourselves can come in off the streets, pick up a chick, jive in the aisles, and really have yourselves a ball. The result is, we are playing to packed houses every night. except of course for Sunday, when we are forced to close our doors because of the Lord's Day Observance Society.
Okay, that's a little bit there from Beyond the Fringe. Yeah, where did these good people go to dinner?
Vouchers?
Have you got one?
No.
Ah, well, they never take them here unless you've actually got them. Sticky about
You know
that.
what? Why don't we go and sit down and have a swat tonight?
Shall we make a move?
Yes, all right then. Where do you want to sit?
Is that all right for you?
It's all right for me.
You want to sit here?
Is that all right for you?
Is that all right for you?
It's fine for me, but you want to sit here?
That's all right. Why the bloody hell did you say that?
Let's get hold of a waiter.
Waiter.
I've got one. I've got one here. I've got one here. What are we going to have?
So Beyond the Fringe is referenced, I think, in either the second or the third season of The Crown. The British Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, goes to a performance and he's called out by the Peter Cook character.
Yes. I'm going to have the same as you, I think.
Same as me.
Yes.
You devil. Good God, have you seen that?
What's that?
What?
Good heavens.
Isn't that fantastic?
What's that?
Children under 10, 12 and 6.
It's very cheap.
It's very cheap. I think they're probably imported.
Probably frozen, I should think.
Oh, foreign.
Yes,
Foreign or frozen. You wouldn't get local children at that price.
I wonder how they prepare them.
I shouldn't think they do. I should think they spring it on them.
I can't bear children myself.
That's hardly surprising. I think I'll steer clear of the children and follow your example, Buffy. You know your way around this sort of muck.
Yes, all right.
What are you going to have?
Well, I honestly can't decide now.
It's difficult.
Look, I'll follow you, Griff, if you don't mind.
Oh, right you are. Well, I have decided, actually. I'm going to have what you settled for, I think.
Oh, good. Well, that's very easy then. That's 4 of the same. Oh, the bloody waiter's gone. He's there. Yes, what's that? Pitch him. What's that? Weed him out. Weed him out. Bloody waiter's gone. Why bloody waiter's get off? Come in here. Very expensive restaurant. The bloody waiter's gone. Go and get the waiter. Get a waiter. Plugging the children to death. I said,
Okay, so in Season 2, Episode 10 of The Crown, the British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan.
A terrible impression wherever I
Now he's heard that he gets talked about in this new play called Beyond the Fringe, starring Peter Cook and Dudley Moore. So it shows up in the audience.
To them I say, shame on you. Shame on all of you. Men like Ward deserve none of our pity. They are deserving only of our contempt. The time has finally come to cut out the moral rot at the heart of British society. You will not convict the defendant just because he was at the center of all this depravity, but because he was the orchestrator of it. Be in no doubt, he is a thoroughly filthy fellow. It is therefore in the highest public interest that you do your duty and return a verdict of guilty on this indictment.
Nothing to answer for.
So this is where the
carefully about
British...
what he was saying, that we were friends. Sure.
The British Prime Minister had been cucked by his wife by 3 decades at this point. They were only together for public purposes. And she comes home from a play to tell him that he's
there are fault
featured
lines in most marriages.
in Beyond the Fringe.
And I could admit to mine.
Peter Cook, Dudley Moore.
I didn't come to you on bended knees 6 years ago, begging to serve in your government, only to make a fool of you.
believe him? In the course of my life, I've learned to recognize the face of a liar. Something in the features is drawn differently. Something in the eyes. What other option is there? To distrust those close to me? Those who profess to love me? That would be too painful.
Yeah, his wife. Cucked him for
The
3
photograph?
decades.
Which photograph?
At a party hosted by one Stephen Ward, society osteopath. A call
Talking about
girl
the
and a Russian spy in the
Profumo
foreground.
scandal.
In the background,
A shadow.
a shadow with Profumo's likeness.
If you say so. I say there's reasonable doubt.
This is the scandal that brings him down.
Credulous, trusting, fool.
She can't respect a man she's been cucking for 3 decades, even if he is prime minister. So she goes to the West End, sees the
It
play.
was wonderful. If they weren't sending up toffs, they were having a go at government corruption or the hypocrisy of our bishops, having a dig at the British war effort. At one point, they even turned on the Queen.
The Queen?
It was really very funny.
We're also very much enthused about our forthcoming trip to Indra and Pakistan. Prince Philip tells me he is very much looking forward to taking me up the Khyber Pass.
And then they came on to you. What are you most afraid of? The arrival of the newspapers in the morning. It's no use me trying to replicate it. I'll never do it justice.
Was it cruel?
Not cruel, no.
Were people laughing?
Yes.
Did Boothby laugh?
That's their
Who
love.
said anything about Boothby? I'm assuming it's who you were there with. Did he laugh?
Okay, so she's been cucking him for 3 decades with this guy.
Yes.
Just imagine being British Prime Minister and your wife is publicly cucking you for 3 decades, but you can't divorce her because it would end your political career. And now she's gone to a play where everybody is laughing at her husband, the British Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan.
Did you?
Yes. You should go. See what's happening to your bloody country.
Season 2, Episode 10 of The Crown.
Why else are we engaging in the public square if we're not trying to affect things in the limited way that we can? I mean, give me a break.
Yeah, and the headline says the big takeaway of the 2020 election is that literally no one changed their mind except people like Richard Spencer and Brett Griffin.
Yeah,
Literally no one
and
else.
look at the people who did change their minds. So look who were vehemently opposed to Trump in 2016 and then unequivocally, glowingly endorsed him in 2020. Ben Shapiro, Glenn Beck.
Well, I mean, if you want to get into
Review.
it, I mean, that's the story of the election right there.
Yeah.
What happened between 2016 and 2020? The way he won in 2016 is the way he lost in 2020.
Exactly.
In 2020, in 2020, you look at the numbers and what it's nationally, he won 85% of conservatives. He won 94% of Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
The upper middle class swung towards Trump by 7 or 8 points. And
in this past election in 2020.
Yeah, in 2020, and he did. In one of the things I think that was given too much credit was like, oh, it's a new multi-ethnic Republican, it's a new multi-ethnic, multiracial, working class Republican Party because Trump did better with minorities this time than he did last time. But actually, the big actually there is that because he was seen as a more conservative, normal conservative Republican, he didn't perform as badly with non-whites this time as he did last time. So I mean he ran as a Republican. I mean that's the story. He ran as a conservative. He ran as a Republican. He lost the Rust Belt while winning more blacks, more Hispanics, more Asians. But I mean the margins are there. It's like it
so
wasn't so much that
ironically, it looks like 2012.
Yeah.
The map.
Right,
So we're going back to Republican candidates, and there is a blue wall. That's what it reminds me of. And it shows that 2016 was a remarkable, maybe aberration or maybe just, Hail Mary victory. And I don't even know if he did it consciously. I'm generally of the opinion that Trump just stumbles upon these things and maybe thinks with his gut a bit. But the remarkable thing about 2016 was all of these Obama Republicans, basically, like they voted for Obama once or twice even, and then they voted for Trump in 2016, and that's a remarkable shift. Or they were apathetic, and these are tens of millions of people. And again, they gave him these narrow margins in the Midwest, but they made that.
So when I look at my Google Analytics for my YouTube channel, my viewership is about 99% male. Godwood Podcast has looked at his analytics. His listenership is 100% male.
Rust Belt strategy possible. Now that Rust Belt strategy depends upon Florida. And but that being said, that was the kind of unique thing because Republicans have kind of won Florida before. It's really winning Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania. That's the kind of new thing. That
Florida was trending more Republican even in 2018 because DeSantis won there.
Margarita tweets, shaming sex work, obesity, and promiscuity is crucial to build a society in which women are not mentally, physically, and emotionally harmed by the false belief that these are valid and healthy choices to make.
And who else? Scott? Yeah. So,
Rick Scott.
Yeah. And Ohio is, ceased to be a swing state. So that's interesting.
It's now a red state, apparently. Yeah.
It's now a red state. Yeah. So,
Richard,
go ahead.
Yeah,
you thought that Trump won more non-white votes because he just went back to being a normal Republican and maybe not like such a crypto white nationalist or
no,
he didn't do dog roasting. But I think it's because
it's more complicated. But go ahead with your interpretation.
I think that because didn't he win like more non-whites than even a normal Republican would win? I think it's probably because of, quite frankly, because like Trump is kind of a character from a rap song or something. Like he has like an appeal to like blacks in particular that like Mitt Romney or someone wouldn't have. Like
I think that's
like he is Donald Trump and like he did the panic. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. He has been in all these rap songs, like music that I've never heard before. I've only heard little snippets of it, but he is a meme, you could say, like an icon. And I think that was part of it. I mean, I've heard reports that he literally just paid like $1 million to these rap stars to get their endorsement.
Yeah, I would be surprised.
Okay, back to my favorite new book, Britain at Bay, The Epic Story of the Second World War. So in the summer of 1940, the Fuhrer Adolf Hitler ordered his general staff to prepare plans for a campaign against England. There are two ways that could go. There could be a blockade or an invasion. So a blockade would require a campaign of attrition, comprehensively wearing down the British war economy and the country's ability to continue fighting. The alternative to blockade was for the Luftwaffe to establish rapid air superiority over the Channel in southeast England and threaten or actually undertake an amphibious invasion. Amphibious means over water. Principal target in this case would be the Royal Air Force, its fighter and bomber aerodromes, early warning stations, anti-aircraft units, its operational squadrons, either caught on the ground or shot down in aerial combat. Royal Navy warships would also be attacked where possible to reduce Britain's anti-invasion fleet. Ideally, the campaign would begin as soon as possible to take greatest advantage of the good weather and the British Army's disorientation in the work of Dunkirk. So rather than a steadily attritional slog presiding over many months, the attack on Britain would be one of terrifying ferocity lasting just a few weeks or even days. It would be only necessary to maintain a window of air supremacy over the sea approaches and beaches for a short time. Perhaps in the final hours, the Luftwaffe could unleash indiscriminate terror bombing against London, terrifying the city's people into flight and so jamming the roads of southern England with refugees to delay Britain's ground forces. Once the conditions for successful invasion were established, ideally the government in Westminster would see sense, and if not, as a last resort, the operation of an invasion could be carried out. Now, there are advantages and problems to both strategies. The essential point was that these were different strategies. They could not be executed coherently at the same time. A choice had to be made between the two, yet Hitler, in effect, ignored that choice. He essentially pushed his armed forces to carry out both strategies simultaneously. This was incoherent, and it was never going to win. And there's no reasonable expectation that the Germans could ever establish air superiority over British airspace, and the Royal Navy was always going to be able to destroy any German invasion force. Wasn't radar per se that helped Britain win the Battle of Britain in the air. It was information synthesis and coordinated response. So the British developed an integrated early warning network that was fast, flexible, and accurate enough to respond to a German air attack. So it's not that the Germans didn't know the British had radar.
It was probably money well spent, to be honest.
He has an appeal, just being himself, he has an appeal to these people
Yeah.
that some normal Republican wouldn't like
yeah, they're not going to vote for Romney. So I think he did well there. Now, I think there is a complicated story among Hispanics, because if you take a step back, like the 65-35 break of Hispanics, or 60-40, maybe 70-30, that has not changed. So it changed in kind of little places. So I think in Florida, there are there's always been a kind of Republican base of, like Cubans who are wildly anti-socialism and so on. I think there's also a kind of aspirational Hispanic in the suburb that was looking towards Trump. And I think Trump lost that, alt-right edge, you could say, that he had in 2016, and it became something different. My little pet theory, which I don't know how I or anyone could prove this, but I think there was some, there are these wild districts like in South Texas that were just like extreme Trump. And my pet theory is that Hispanics really don't like BLM for a number of reasons, including just, some of the reasons that people are uncomfortable with African Americans in general, but also maybe a little resentment of like, why are we still talking about you guys? Like we're the new minority, we're the ones that matter. Like, why are we, obsessed with Africans as opposed to Hispanics? And I think there was probably like a weird thing that went on there where it was like, let's stick it to BLM by voting for Trump. And I think that obviously held among many whites as well.
I'll jump in and try to give you my explanation of it. Okay, with blacks, with blacks in particular, I think the exit polls, maybe he did 2 to 4 points better than last time from what I've seen with the exit polls.
Steve Saylor talks about the psychology of movies, and Steve Saylor got his MBA from UCLA, and then he went into market research. As an market researcher turned movie reviewer, it has always seemed obvious to me that different kinds of people like different kinds of movies, and that's perfectly reasonable. This is not, however, common view among film critics, most of whom became critics because they have strong views on which movies people should like. So I was pleased to see this new academic study by some marketing psychologists. We are what we watch. Movie plots predict the personalities of those who like them. So remember the Ocean model of personality, the 5-modality model of personality, OCEAN. Openness to experience, you inventive and curious versus consistent and cautious. Conscientiousness, you efficient and organized versus extravagant and careless. You extroverted, outgoing and energetic, or solitary and reserved. You agreeable, friendly and compassionate, or challenging and callous. You neurotic, sensitive and nervous versus resilient and confident. All right. So, certain types of people prefer certain types of movies. So, crime movies appeal to extroverted and less agreeable fans because these traits mirror actual criminal behavior. Liking sci-fi movies is related to higher openness, lower extroversion, and lower conscientiousness, indicating that fans of these genres are imaginative, reflective, and spontaneous. I don't like sci-fi movies, so I think I'm high in openness. I think I'm moderate in extroversion, and I think I'm moderate in conscientiousness. Fans who are high in agreeableness like family movies such as the Pixar films, and horror movies have fans who are low in agreeableness, who are extroverted and highly neurotic. So I hate horror movies. So I think I'm low in agreeableness, evenly based between extroverted and introverted, and I think I'm moderate in neurotic. So neurotics like scary movies. So Steve Saylor says, I am rather jumpy. I don't like loud noises, much less serial killers jumping out of the closet. Hence, I almost never go to horror movies. This completely sums up my attitude. This strikes me as pretty sensible. On the other hand, most people don't seem to see it that way. The genre most strongly associated with those who are lower in openness and neuroticism and high in conscientiousness, extroversion, and agreeableness is sports. So sports fans are low in openness, low in neuroticism, high in conscientiousness, high in extroversion, high in agreeableness. And the most voted sports movie is The Big Lebowski. I don't remember much sports in that movie, followed by a whole bunch of boxing and fighting movies, including Rocky. Okay. There's a wonderful table of the most openness keywords. For example, cigarette smoking, shaving, record player, and least openness, helicopter scene during end credits, singing in a car. So movies for people who are highest in openness: Waking Life, Pi, A Scanner Darkly, The Science of Sleep, The Fountain, Mulholland Drive, The Darjeeling Limited, Being John Malkovich, The Buddha, Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. So very white movies. Movies for those low in openness: Anjana Anjani, Shrek Forever, Get Rich or Die Trying, 8 Seconds, Step Up 3D, Hannah Montana, Boy, Another Cinderella Story, Facing the Giants. So the top 10 for openness are dominated by extremely white directors. Richard Linklater for his philosophical animated films Waking Life and his Philip K. Dick movie A Scanner Darkly. Darren Aronofsky for Pi. Good early work about a genius grad student who has built a mainframe computer to solve a math problem. And The Fountain, also directed by Aronofsky. Wes Anderson for The Darjeeling Limited and Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. David Lynch for Mulholland Drive. I went to a birthday party for David Lynch, and all the stars were there. Who's that actor chick from Australia who's married to Tom Cruise? Nicole Kidman was there. The Miss World, stunning brunette in the movie, was there. Michel Gondry, The Science of Sleep, another movie of people high in openness, and the Spike Jonze, Charlie Kaufman script of Being John Malkovich, and the documentary The Buddha featured Richard Gere and the Dalai Lama. So these are films that appeal to fans of the director, but not as much to outsiders. And the movies for people low in openness are lowbrow, extremely lowbrow. People high in extroversion like 8 Seconds, The Wood, Old School, Friday Night Lights, Unforgivable, Love of Basketball, Baby Boy, Friday, and Juice. People low in extroversion like Ghost in the Shell, Kiki's Delivery Service, My Neighbor Totoro, Akira, Silent Hill, Battle Royale, Princess Mononoke, Aliens, and Howl's Moving Castle. So the high extroversion movies are heavily black, and the most introverted movies, they're heavily East Asian. Movies that appeal to those high in agreeableness are incredibly feminine. Facing the Giants, Letters to God, Fireproof, The Passion of the Christ, The Lake House, The Buddha, Patch Adams, Ever After, A Cinderella Story, Pay It Forward, You've Got Mail. And low agreeableness movies are highly masculine. Hellraiser, Hannibal Rising, Heathers, Red Dragon, Party Monster, Get Rich or Die Trying, Hannibal, Lord of War, The Human Centipede, and Taxi Driver. So Taxi Driver is one of the 10 least agreeable movies. Objectively, the message of Taxi Driver is that highly cultured individuals such as Martin Scorsese, Robert De Niro, Jodie Foster, and Paul Schrader want you to take away from the movie is don't be like Travis Bickle. On the other hand, the message that John Hinckley Jr. and a lot of viewers took away from Taxi Driver is, hell yeah, be just like Travis Bickle. So people seem to want movies to vindicate their own personalities. They want to see on screen people who are just like them in personality, only much, much better looking.
But what actually happened is that in 2008 and 2012, Obama was, on the ticket. So the Republicans did worse with blacks in both of those elections. And then in 2016 and 2020, blacks kind of migrated back to the George W. Bush 2004, about 10% of the black vote, getting more black women and about 6 or 7 points more of the black male vote. But nothing really changed. That's really just the fading, in my view, the fading of the Obama effect. Maybe the Jared's Platinum Plan thing had some kind of impact. Maybe all these rap stars, maybe marginally like in places like Chicago, like the places that Trump did better than last time were Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia. The places where all the fraud is supposed to occur. Those are literally the places where he did better. Trump won 5,000 more votes in Detroit, and Joe Biden won 1,000 less votes than Hillary. In Detroit, where the fraud occurred.
Well, they're just covering their tracks by doing that. Yeah,
covering their tracks by rigging the election in favor of Trump.
Right.
But
they decided to allow Republicans to win some congressional races while engaging in fraud, just to kind of throw us off.
So in 2020, Trump ran as a more normal Republican and kind of went back to the George W. Bush 2004 level of support with blacks. With
So Ashi says listening to Richard Spencer podcast is not different to listening to Rachel Maddow. I find all the difference in the world. I find more interesting ideas in Richard Spencer podcasts than almost any other podcast. Now, I think overall he's toxic and he's self-destructive and he's destructive to people who look to him for leadership, but he is consistently interesting. I don't find Rachel Maddow interesting.
With Asians, I heard he got something like 7% more of the Asian vote. And there's a number of things going on there. First of all, a lot of I think the Vietnamese in California like the fact that he was so anti-China. And then you also got Hindus who, or Indians, he courted the Indian vote heavily. He went over to India and did a big rally there with Modi. So he wants, I think, more of them. And then, of course, he's been, just completely anti-Iran, anti-Shiite. And the Muslim ban, of course, turned out to be this big joke that really applied only to Iran and like North Korea and Venezuela and Cuba. And so he won more. The Asian vote is kind of complicated. There's a lot of beefs and resentments going on there. And of course, I think a lot of some Asians were just scared off by alienated by didn't they vote against affirmative action in California? I want to say.
Oh yeah, that was an interesting thing actually. There was a big referendum on affirmative action that was just emphatic. And
then Hispanics, and then with Hispanics, it's a couple things. First of all, with Tijanos down in South Texas, that was like the biggest, if I'm not mistaken, one of the two biggest shifts. Those people down there are, have been there for like 200 years in Texas. So they think of themselves as whites, I guess 56%ers. They think of themselves as natives. They think of themselves as rural voters, working class voters. And of course, Joe Biden was like, okay, or the impression in the campaign was that they were going to abolish ICE. A lot of those people opened the border. A lot of those people work for the Border Patrol. And fracking was a big issue down there that Trump made an issue of. And so,
So all three of the Denver Bronco quarterbacks cannot play in the game tomorrow because they were unmasked around some assistant coach who tested positive for COVID. So guess who's going to play quarterback for the Denver Broncos tomorrow? Von Miller, apparently. That might be fun.
Trump appealed to those Hispanics. He lost. I want to say he lost handily amongst the Mexican immigrants in places like Dallas, but down there he appealed to Hispanics as whites and natives and rural voters whose interests would be injured by having Biden as president persuasively. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, in South Florida, it was Venezuela and socialism and Cuba and socialism, and you got two big expat communities there who the socialism sucks message resonated with him, and he appealed to them on the basis of nationality, not as like Hispanics, and won more of them. And then of course, just because he was seen as a more normal Republican candidate, and immigration really wasn't part of this election at all. It was, I think, 3% of voters said that immigration was the most important issue, and because immigration was off the table and Trump was running as a more normal Republican, he won more. He just did. It's not that he did better with the Hispanic vote. It's just he did so much poorly with it the first time. Yeah. So, and then of course, but the biggest shift of all, the most decisive thing that happened I've written about it endlessly on my blog, is with, you can count white men, independents, moderates, living in the suburbs, making under $100,000 a year. That's where he lost the election.
Yeah.
Clearly.
I.e.
What do you think of that?
The 5%. It's where the 5% meme, where it's like, look, you can hate on this all you want, but it's actually a real thing. Right. We're describing reality, and you can hate it. And I've heard other people where, I don't want to make this too personal, but it's that Genie guy who, again, claims to be a big Trump critic, but when you look at his actions and not his words, he's clearly a Trump fanatic. And he would, I think at one point he literally said, he was like, oh, well, yeah, he did, those numbers are right, but with the 5%, that's all fraud. It's just kind of like
fraud.
Anything. Yeah, it's just like fraud is this catch-all, argument that you can use.
I forgot.
It's ridiculous.
I forgot college educated. I forgot college educated there. So if you tick in every Richard Spencer box, but you got white male, you got independent voter, you got moderate, is it not being a liberal or a conservative? You got college educated, and
I was just following my ethnic group basically,
extremely turned on by Trumpism. Right, and I've identified I've gone through I did a previous podcast with Robert Stark, and I got on all the Pew typology surveys, and I explained exactly where all these people were in the electorate. It was right in the dead center. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think on the pre-election podcast I did with you, I was like, I think that Trump's going to lose because I'm kind of in the dead center of where things are. And that's exactly what happened. He appealed. What happened was that in the 2016 election, and this is true across the. You can see it in exit polls in both things. he won in the Trump's base in the 2016 election was amongst white independents, more moderates. Man, when he was elected, he was seen as an extremely moderate for Republicans, and that is on economics and foreign policy and issues like
he was
that.
Explicitly in a book he came out in favor of healthcare for all. He wasn't quite as explicit in the campaign, but he indicated as much. He was going to save all these jobs and rig the system on our behalf.
Right.
And again, the conservatives actually did campaigning for him, because from the summer of 2015 up until the summer of 2016, when they all turned, or more, a lot of them did at least, one of their key critiques was that he's a big liberal. Wasn't even Malkin saying that? I'm kind of curious. I don't follow her, but I wouldn't be surprised if she were doing the same thing. And they would.
That was Nick Montes was saying that.
Right.